Harry Potter, the Necromancer of Hogwarts. With the necromancer profession in Diablo 2, Mark came to the world of Harry Potter. On the first day of the transmigration, he was stamped with the mark of the Dark Lord. On the second day Voldemort was defeated, and on the third day he was thrown into Azkaban. May I ask what to do at the beginning of hell? Waiting online, quite urgent. Chapter 1. Mark is a hardcore Diablo 2 player. He particularly has a special liking for the necromancer profession. On this day, he was fighting in the world of Diablo 2, and the other screen was rewatching the Harry Potter series of movies. Suddenly, a black vortex appeared in his computer and swallowed Mark inside. Cold, dark, and damp, this is how Mark felt after waking up. He opened his eyes with difficulty. It felt like there was a heavy weight all over his body, and he couldn't even move a finger. Mark found that he seemed to be in a cage. There were some people in black robes standing outside, and everyone exuded a fierce aura. For some reason, Mark could see the scene clearly even in dim light. He clearly saw that some men in black robes had the marks of skulls and snakes intertwined on their arms. Mark has seen this mark countless times in movies before. It is Voldemort's dark mark. These people are Death Eaters. Is this some kind of reality show scene? No, it's impossible. What kind of reality show can kidnap me from home and come here all at once? These people are real Death Eaters. This is the world of Harry Potter. At this time, the door outside opened with a creak, and a handsome but cold man walked in. All the Death Eaters stepped aside respectfully and bowed to the man, which revealed his identity, Tom Riddle, or Voldemort. Voldemort looked at Mark in the cage silently, with undisguised disgust in his eyes. So, I asked you to find the prophesied baby, but you found me a 6-year-old child, and a squib. Voldemort's eyes slowly swept over the Death Eaters, causing them to kneel down in fear. Lord Dark Lord, we think it is very unusual for a pure-blood family to have a squib. The age of the child in the prophecy may not be accurate. This abnormal child may be like the protagonist in the story and will reveal his strangeness at some point. Voldemort's eyes filled with rage, the tip of his wand lit up with green light, turning the Death Eater who had done something stupid into a corpse. I didn't know that you still like reading fairy tales so much. This is really humiliating to me. Listen up, baby, it's a baby. The prophecy mentioned a baby. Voldemort's wand turned towards Mark, the anger in his eyes still unquenched. But the appearance of a squib in a pure-blood family is indeed a shame for everyone. The tip of the wand glowed with dark green light, and the death curse was ready to go. Looking at the wand pointed at him, Mark's mind went blank, and the fear of death spread throughout his body. Could it be that he had just traveled through time and was about to die here? No, I don't want to die, I don't want to die. Just when the dark green light reached its peak and was about to fly out of the wand, there was a roar in Mark's mind, as if something exploded. A system panel unfolded in front of him, including character attributes, skill trees, and inventory. This was the Diablo 2 Necromancer panel that Mark was most familiar with. Mark couldn't think about too many things. His only thought now was to show off his magic power. Voldemort was not so extravagant as to kill pure-blood wizards at will. Pure-blood wizards were still his base. He must prove that he is not a squib, but a pure-blood wizard. Only in this way can he survive. Mark's attention is focused on the skill panel. The number of skill points he currently has is 1. The skills that can be learned are Teeth, Damage Amplification, Summoning Skeletons, and Controlling Skeletons. The deepening of the damage is a curse, which cannot be noticed unless you feel it yourself, but unleashing a curse on Voldemort or a Death Eater is courting death. Both Summoning Skeletons and Controlling Skeletons require corpses. Although there is a corpse in the room now, if he uses necromancy on the Death Eater's corpse to turn it into a skeleton, he is also seeking death. So now there is only one skill that Mark can learn. He quickly put his skill points on the first spell Fang of the Bone and Poison system. Teeth, Level 1, Condense magic power to create sharp bone teeth to pierce your enemies, Quantity 1, Damage 1-2. There was no time to think about the route to add points in the future. At the moment when Voldemort was about to issue the death curse, Mark let out a low drink, and a strange magic power broke out on him. Boom! A pale bone suddenly appeared and flew forward, making a sound of cold wind, and suddenly penetrated into the wall of the house. The Death Eaters in the room paused for a moment, with surprise in their eyes. The magic power broke out at this time. It seems that in the face of death, magic power burst out subconsciously. What good luck! But his magic gives me an ominous feeling, a cold power, which is really uncomfortable. I have never seen an explosion of magic power with this characteristic. He doesn't seem to be suffering from magic backlash. It's strange. Could it be a special situation of their family? Voldemort stopped the death curse he was about to launch, and looked at Mark in surprise. You gave me quite a surprise. This kind of magic, haha, smells like death. It's really interesting. Voldemort's eyes slowly filled with murderous intent. He remembered what the dead Death Eater said before. Yes, who can guarantee that the prediction will be correct? If there is any discrepancy in age, could the baby who was predicted to defeat him be the child in front of him? Maybe it would be safer to kill him. Just when Voldemort clenched his wand again, a short, cowardly man walked in from outside. Mark recognized this man immediately. After all, it was easy to know his identity through his appearance and temperament, Peter Pettigrew. In the original book, it was Peter who betrayed the Potters and revealed their location to Voldemort, which led to the fidelity curse being broken and the Potters' tragic deaths, which led to the subsequent story. When he saw Peter, Mark understood what time it was now. Now is the darkest hour before dawn. Not long after Harry Potter was born, Voldemort, who swept the wizarding world, was about to face his tragic failure. After Peter arrived, Mark knew that he should get out of the crisis temporarily. With Harry Potter, who was recognized by Dumbledore as the child of the prophecy, Voldemort would not bother to kill him. Sure enough, after receiving the news about Peter Pettigrew, Voldemort's eyes burst into ecstasy. Well, you have made a wise choice, my servant. What you can't get from Dumbledore, you will get from me. Voldemort held the wand, and powerful magic radiated from his body. Let's go. Before leaving the room, he suddenly remembered something. With a flick of the wand, a faint green light imprinted on Mark's arm. What? Mark let out a scream, and after the light dissipated, a pattern of a skull and a snake was left on his arm. He was marked with the mark of the Dark Devil. Voldemort said calmly, "This child's magic smells of death, and his existence is to join the Death Eaters. In the near future, he will become the backbone of the Death Eaters. Take him down to rest." Mark's vision went dark, his body couldn't hold on any longer and he fell into a coma. Before he fainted, 2 Death Eaters had taken him to a warm room and put him on the bed. At this moment, only one thought flashed through Mark's mind, and then he fell completely unconscious. It's over, it's over. I was marked with the dark mark when Voldemort went to find Harry Potter. How will I spend the next 12 years? What should I do at the start of Hell difficulty? Wait online, it's quite urgent. Chapter 2. Mark didn't know how long he slept, but his sleep felt very uneasy. It seemed that someone was whispering to him in his sleep, claiming to be Tagio, the leader of the necromancy school, and hoping that Mark would inherit the inheritance of the necromancy school, ignite the divine fire, and become the god of the necromancy. But before Mark could reply in his sleep, there were fierce sounds of fighting outside. In particular, there were waves of shouting, "The mysterious man is dead, arrest all the Death Eaters." When he heard this voice, Mark broke into a cold sweat and jumped up from his sleep. He is still aching all over his body. After all, his body is only 6 years old. The teeth he used last night almost drained his magic power. Later, Mark was left with the dark mark by Voldemort, which was not a pleasant feeling. It was only thanks to the system panel that he could still move now. Thinking of the Black Devil's mark, Mark was also excited and looked towards his left hand. He hoped that he was just having a nightmare, but unfortunately, the ferocious mark of the Dark Devil on his left hand seemed to be grinning at him, which made Mark feel bitter in his heart. At this moment, boom, bursts of explosions came from outside. A group of Death Eaters opened the door in a panic and entered the room. Fear could not be suppressed on everyone's face. The Aurors are coming. There are too many of them, the spell is too strong, and Dumbledore is here too. We won't be able to stop them. Where is the Master? Where is the Master? Has the Master really failed? Bella Lestrange, the fanatical believer of Voldemort, let out an angry roar. Shut up! Master will never fail. He will definitely come back and rule this magical world. Mark, who was lying on the bed, sighed inwardly. Frankly speaking, he really hoped that Voldemort would come back now. Otherwise, if you carry the mark of the Dark Devil on your body, you will be like a rat crossing the street and everyone will scream and beat you up. But what Mark didn't expect was that Bella turned around and looked at him eagerly. Just when Mark felt cold all over, Bella grabbed Mark's arm that was marked by the Black Devil's mark, and shouted to everyone, "The child the master mentioned yesterday is still there. They have the boy who lived and we have the death child. Before the master comes back, as long as we protect the son of death, we Death Eaters still have hope." Mark looked confused as his hand was grabbed. "How could I, a deadbeat otaku, become the son of death? I'm not being modest, you'd better hire someone else." And at this moment, boom, the door of this room was blasted open by Dumbledore and the Aurors. They all heard clearly what Bella just said. Everyone gasped. The mysterious man actually found a child and thought he was the son of death. Oh my god, that child has the dark mark on his hand. Only the most trusted Death Eaters will be given the dark mark. What the Death Eaters say is true. He is the son of death. No, he may be the descendant of the Dark Lord, or even the illegitimate son of the mysterious man. The expressions of the Aurors changed dramatically, and even Dumbledore's heart sank. Voldemort was dead, which was a huge blow to the Death Eaters. But if those Death Eaters scattered throughout the magical world heard that the Dark Lord had appointed a child of death, and that this child might even be the illegitimate son of the mysterious man, then they might even persist again and form a stubborn confrontation. A cold light flashed in Mad Eye Moody's eyes. His wand was aimed at Mark, and a crimson light struck him. The other Aurors also reacted. The news about this child cannot be known to the outside world, otherwise it will cause big trouble. Then the most trouble-free way is to let this child completely disappear from the world. Their wands burst out with light, and spells struck Mark like a violent storm. Each spell cast by these Aurors with profound magic is enough to easily kill an adult. With Mark's age of only 6 years old and his negligible magical power, he would die if he received a spell. Bella and other fanatical Death Eaters tried their best to protect Mark, and even tried to disseparate Mark and escape from here, waiting for Mark to grow up and make a comeback. In their opinion, if they don't want to die in Azkaban, they have no choice but to believe in the Dark Lord's vision and place their hopes on this child. But the Aurors were well prepared and had banned any means of leaving the manor, in order to capture the core of the Death Eaters. Besides, Dumbledore is here. As Dumbledore raised his wand, a golden red light lit up, and zigzag lightning flew, defeating all the Death Eaters' resistance. With a splash, the Death Eaters fell to the ground, leaving Mark alone in the room. Moody and the other Aurors were overjoyed. "Well done, Principal Dumbledore. We will capture all these Death Eaters in Azkaban and let them spend the rest of their lives there. As for this child, we cannot let him live." Moody and others aimed their wands at Mark, and the deadly curse was ready to be unleashed. Dumbledore looked at Mark's young and thin appearance and let out a sigh. "Moody, wait, he is just a child. He has just experienced a magic rampage and has not yet entered Hogwarts to learn magic. He has not committed any crime. We cannot kill him just because Voldemort pays special attention to him. So what is the difference between our approach and Voldemort's?" At Dumbledore's insistence, the Aurors did not kill Mark on the spot out of Dumbledore's face. But Dumbledore could only help Mark so far, and Mark had to be taken to the Wizengamot court for trial. Apology flashed in Dumbledore's eyes. "Child, don't be afraid, the Wizengamot is a fair court, and you will not be punished for crimes you have not committed." That night, Mark was taken to the Wizengamot under layers of supervision to undergo a secret trial. The fairness claimed by Dumbledore was not reflected here. That night, except for Dumbledore's one vote against, the Wizengamot unanimously approved the punishment of Mark. He will be imprisoned in Azkaban forever, without any contact with the outside world. After the court adjourned, Mark's punishment began immediately. 10 fully armed Aurors pressed Mark to Azkaban prison, passed through the Dementors that feed on human happiness and souls, and imprisoned Mark in the deepest part of Azkaban. In prison. "You will die here, the descendant of the mysterious man." The Aurors spat, and then fled from Azkaban, which made them all feel uncomfortable. The cold feeling immediately began to erode Mark's body and mind. Mark stared blankly at the cold walls of Azkaban. On the first day of traveling through the magical world, he was marked with the mark of the Dark Devil. On the second day after traveling through the Wizarding world, Voldemort fell. On the third day after traveling through the magical world, he was sent to Azkaban as a descendant of Voldemort. What to do with this hellish difficulty start? Waiting online, very anxious. Chapter 3. Azkaban, the most notorious prison in the Wizarding world. Some criminals would rather commit suicide than enter Azkaban, because being imprisoned in Azkaban means death, and it is a death that is tortured every day. The Dementors guarding Azkaban will suck away all the happy memories, leaving only the most unpleasant and uncomfortable ones, torturing people day after day. Because of this, almost everyone in the wizarding world has turned a blind eye to Azkaban. And now, in the deepest part of Azkaban, Mark is being held captive here alone. Emptiness and coldness permeated his body and mind. This was the influence of Dementors. The happy memories in Mark's heart were fading away bit by bit. But before suffering from the torture of the Dementors, Mark first felt another more real pain. He hadn't eaten anything since yesterday, except when Dumbledore got him some food in the Wizengamot court. Will someone come to deliver food? Mark said to himself as he endured hunger. Then he thought about it and felt that he probably couldn't wait any longer. First of all, Voldemort has just fallen, and the Ministry of Magic is probably busy with countless things, and may not have the time to care about himself, the prisoner of Azkaban. Secondly, even if they send people or Dementors to deliver food, they might not dare to eat it themselves. He had the mark of the Dark Devil on his hand, and what was even more terrible was that he was publicly identified by Bella and other Death Eaters as the child that the Dark Lord favored. He was inexplicably given the title of Son of Death, and some even thought that he was the descendant or illegitimate son of Voldemort. The Ministry of Magic imprisoned him in Azkaban, but I'm afraid they still thought that the sooner he died, the better. For these reasons, Mark smiled bitterly and murmured to himself. Does this mean we have to be self-reliant? At least you can't die from hunger. He dragged his tired body and sat up from the ground, looking around to see if there was anything edible. But he looked around and saw no living things except the moss growing on the clammy walls. There may be rats or other creatures in the outer cells, but in this deepest cell in Azkaban, not even a rat or cockroach can be seen. Mark looked around in annoyance, but he couldn't find anything that could satisfy his hunger. It is said that a lot of mosses are poisonous, and the ones that grow in places like Azkaban are probably not edible. What can I eat? You can't eat dirt, right? Mark sat on the ground and took a deep breath. Calm down, don't panic, panic will only make me hungrier. Now that I'm in this situation, all I can take advantage of is the loopholes in Azkaban itself. Only by finding the loopholes and breaking through the cell can I possibly get some food. So, what are the loopholes in Azkaban, the strongest prison cell in the wizarding world? A glimmer of light flashed in Mark's eyes. It's aimed at wizards in the Harry Potter world. Most wizards lose the ability to cast spells after losing their wands, and the door to their cell is impenetrable to them. But I'm different. I'm not a wizard from the Harry Potter world. I have the necromancer profession from Diablo 2. I should start with the necromancer's ability and try to break through this cell. The light in Mark's eyes became brighter and brighter. He took a deep breath and focused on the teeth he had learned before. On the system panel, although Mark's level is level 1, perhaps because he is too young, all of his attributes are terrible, far inferior to the level 1 necromancer in the game. Therefore, his magic power can only emit 2 teeth at most. What can these 2 spells do for me? Mark is thinking about this problem. Make a hole in the cell bars? But although the bars of the cell look rotten, you can tell by touching them that they are made of iron, and the railings are quite thick. If it doesn't have enough lethality, I'm afraid it's unlikely to open a hole in it. Then open a hole in the wall and crawl out? But although the wall is not made of iron, it is surprisingly thick, and there is granite reinforcement inside. It is impossible to make a hole even after a few years of work. Mark looked around now, and it seemed that his meager magic power could not do anything, and it would not be of any help to his situation. It would be great if I could upgrade. In Diablo 2, all statuses will be instantly replenished after upgrading. If it can be upgraded, it might be able to help me regain my strength and energy, allowing me to sustain myself for a while longer. But Mark looked at his experience gauge. The current experience value is 0, and 500 experience points are needed to upgrade to the next level. Upgrading requires experience points. I'm locked up here. Where can I go to fight monsters and upgrade? Just when Mark felt slightly depressed, he suddenly saw some movement in the cell opposite him. A skinny wizard, with a sense of despair all over his body, dragged his body that was about to collapse and leaned on the railing of his cell. The wizard said to Mark in a hoarse voice, I don't know why you were imprisoned. But before you become like me and don't even have the strength to commit suicide, I would like to advise you. Kill yourself to avoid torture. After saying these words, the wizard's strength seemed to be drained away, and he fell to the ground dying, without even the strength to move. Mark looked at the miserable condition of the wizard, and a thought suddenly flashed through his mind. You want to die? Mark's voice fell gently on the wizard's ears. The wizard looked at Mark with wide eyes. He felt a cold magic power emanating from Mark's body, and a pale bone tooth quickly floated in Mark's hand. The sharp bones and teeth were aimed at the wizard. Mark's forehead was covered with cold sweat and his hands were trembling. There was no fear in the wizard's eyes, but ecstasy in his eyes. He used his last strength to blink his eyes and signaled to Mark that he could take action. Mark took a deep breath, closed his eyes, and then activated the magic teeth. Bone Tooth brought up a fierce howl of wind, howling through the gap in the railing, and then penetrated the wizard's chest. Puff! The wizard's weak vitality quickly disappeared, and the damage to Bone Teeth took away the last bit of his life. Immediately afterwards, an invisible object flew out of the wizard's body and entered Mark's body. On Mark's system panel, the experience points began to increase rapidly. 100, 200, 300. It was not until the end that the experience value slowly stopped at 1000 points. During this period, Mark's level also jumped suddenly, from level 1 to level 2, and he was only 500 points short of reaching level 3. A golden light that only Mark could see enveloped him, and then a stream of heat gushed out from all over his body. All the previous fatigue and hunger had dissipated, and Mark was full of energy and returned to his best condition. Mark felt a burst of ecstasy in his heart. At least he didn't have to worry about starving to death here in the next 2 days. Then he suddenly thought of something and quickly suppressed the joy in his heart. But the smell of joy he exuded still attracted a Dementor guarding Azkaban. When this kind of monster smells joy, it will be like a shark seeing blood, trying to swallow up Mark's joy. What's worse is that people who have been sucked into joy will be extremely tired, drowsy, and have almost no ability to move. If it were absorbed by it, wouldn't Mark's actions just now be in vain? We must not let it succeed. Mark had a ruthless look in his eyes and brought up the system panel. Has 5 character attribute points and 1 skill point. All 5 attribute points are added to the spirit, and the skill points are used to learn new skills. I want to learn curse spells, the damage will increase. Chapter 4. The cold feeling gradually became stronger, and Mark could see that outside the cell, a monster wrapped in a cloak was slowly approaching him. This is the Warden of Azkaban, the Dementor who feeds on human joy and souls. At this time, Mark had finished adding points and nervously looked at the Dementors floating towards the cell. As the Necromancer template in Diablo 2, he has 4 attributes: strength, agility, physical strength, and spirituality. For every level up, Mark will gain 1 character attribute points and 5 skill point. In order to increase his lethality as much as possible, Mark just added all 5 attribute points to energy. After upgrading and adding points, Mark's current attribute values are as follows. Strength 4 points. Agility 5 points. Physical strength 5 points. Spirit 10 points. His health reached 15 points, and his mana reached 20 after adding points. A level 1 tooth consumes 2 mana points each time, so Mark can use it nearly 10 times with his current mana. However, the Necromancer's spells are not good at direct damage. The damage of the teeth is very low, only 1 to 2 points. But I just learned a damage increasing curse. The effect of this curse is to double the damage taken by the enemy. With this curse, the damage I can unleash will be even higher. Do your best, obey fate, and hope to kill this Dementor. Mark took a deep breath and stared at the Dementor approaching him. The Dementors followed the smell of joy and approached Mark's cell. The prisoners in Azkaban had long been tortured to the point of numbness, and almost no one could produce the emotion of joy. This Dementor had been hungry for a long time, and now it suddenly felt the joy radiating from Mark, and it was also aroused to the desire to eat. Moreover, Mark is still a child in his current body, and the child's joy and soul are what Dementors like to eat most. The Dementor greedily approached Mark's cell, never thinking that the prisoner would resist it. And the moment the Dementor appeared within the casting distance, Mark took a deep breath and let out a low cry, the damage will increase. A red mark that only he could see suddenly floated out and was printed on the Dementor's body. The Dementor's body suddenly stiffened, and he felt a sense of danger welling up. This kind of creature is originally invisible. Only magic full of positive energy, such as the Patroness charm, can destroy it. Other magic spells are basically unable to cause harm to it. But when the curse of deepening damage fell on the Dementor suddenly became much more fragile, and even physical attacks could hurt it. A murderous look flashed in Mark's eyes. He originally had this purpose in learning the damage-amplifying curse, because in the game Diablo 2, undead creatures such as ghosts have high damage reduction, and even have the ability to be magically immune and physically immune. But the damage amplification curse is their nemesis. Once the curse continues, no matter how high your damage reduction is, you will become extremely fragile. When the Dementor froze for a moment because of the curse, a kind of magic power full of death surged out of Mark's body. His mana poured out like water. The damage amplifying curse has a limited duration, and damage must be maximized during this time. The first bone tooth took shape, roared out from the gap in the railing, and penetrated fiercely into the Dementor's body. Hiss! A sound like a scream came from the Dementor's body, and the cloak and decayed body that made up its body were penetrated by bones and teeth. Under the damage amplification curse, attacks that could not have hurt it in the first place caused it to suffer damage. Boom! The force carried by the bone tooth knocked the Dementor against the wall, followed by the second tooth. Then the third, the fourth. Call out! Call out! Call out! The sharp sound of breaking through the air continued to sound, and bone teeth hit the Dementor's body like white meteors in the darkness. The damage deepened. Mark shimmered red, amplifying the damage done to the bones and teeth, causing the Dementors to make chilling sounds one after another. Mark's mana was consumed rapidly, and his bones and teeth continued to bombard the Dementor, suppressing the Dementor to the point where it had no resistance. But his heart was sinking rapidly. 5 more shots. 4 shots. 3 rounds. And the last 2 teeth's mana. After removing the 4 points of mana that were used to release damage and deepen the curse, Mark had already released the tooth spell 6 times during this period. The combination of the curse and the tooth spell had already riddled the Dementor's body with holes. Even black mist is escaping from the body. However, the Dementors showed no sign of dissipating. But Mark only had the last 4 points of mana left, which was only enough to cast the last 2 teeth spells. The Dementors felt it, and Mark's heart was filled with despair. The damage-increasing curse attached to it suddenly dissipated at this time. The Dementor was like black smoke being released. The bones and teeth that had penetrated it before could no longer bind it to the wall. The Dementors turned into a black mist and rushed toward Mark's cell. It's hungry. The Dementors desperately need to eat to repair the damage they just suffered. And it was angry, too. It decided not to ignore the Ministry of Magic's regulations not to kill prisoners directly. The child was already imprisoned in the deepest part of Azkaban, and sooner or later he would become food for the Dementors. I am going to eat him now. The Dementors passed through the iron bars and entered Mark's cell. Mark seemed frightened and retreated step by step, the fear and despair in his heart constantly radiating out. The Dementor slowly took off his hood, revealing the rotten head under the hood. On top of its head, a mouth slowly opened, and the chill around it suddenly became much stronger. This is the infamous Dementor's kiss and is a way for Dementors to feed directly. If the Dementors are released in this way, all the happiness and joy in the entire person's soul will disappear, or it can be understood that part of the soul is eaten by the Dementors. After this, people either went crazy or committed suicide in extreme fear and despair. Almost no one survived. The Dementor forced Mark into the corner, and the mouth slowly approached Mark. Mark kept roaring in his heart, "Hurry, hurry, restore your mana." On his system panel, the mana value is beating slowly. Now his mana value is 5 points, just a hair away from reaching 6 points. Long before, when Mark found out that the last 2 tooth spells alone might not be enough to kill the Dementors, he made a decision. He had to wait until the Dementor was defenseless and exposed its fatal weakness before launching the final attack. Only in this way could he kill the Dementor. And this is the moment when the Dementors are ready to eat and reveal the Dementor's kiss. He remains dormant, and his final attack costs 6 mana. He needs to use 4 mana points to issue a damage-enhancing curse, and then uses the last 2 mana points to activate the Fang, piercing the Dementor's head in one fell swoop. And now, the time has come, and there is still a little mana left. Still a little less mana. Mark desperately endured the fear in his heart. All his happy memories were being swallowed up by the coldness around the Dementors. Despair and numbness inevitably surged up, almost making him give up resistance. And at this moment, when almost all the human emotions had dissipated, Mark bit his tongue hard, and the severe pain temporarily pulled Mark back from despair. It was this painful stimulation that caused Mark's mana to jump again, returning to 6 points. At the same moment, a terrifying cold light erupted from Mark's eyes. The damage-enhancing curse took effect, and a red mark was imprinted on the Dementor, making it vulnerable to all attacks again. Mark also condensed a bone tooth in his hand at the fastest speed ever, and penetrated the Dementor's head like a meteor, just in time to penetrate the Dementor's kiss. Boom! The Dementor's body suddenly stiffened, and then turned into a burst of black dust and fell to the ground. A golden light flashed across Mark's body, and the system determined that he had overstepped his rank and killed the Dementor, and received a reward of 500 experience points. This also allowed Mark to fill the gap in experience points and upgrade again, reaching level 3 as a necromancer. The state was replenished, but Mark still sat on the ground, filled with fear. He was almost, just almost, about to have his soul sucked by the Dementors and become a madman from then on. While feeling frightened, his eyes accidentally fell on the black ashes left behind after the Dementor's death. Grunt. I don't know why, but when he saw this thing, Mark felt a surge of appetite, as if he saw something delicious. Is this thing really edible? Although the food didn't look delicious, the hunger in Mark's body became even stronger. He lay down and picked up a handful of ashes. After hesitating for a while, Mark tried to swallow some ashes. This is my first meal after coming to Azkaban. Dementor ashes bibimbap, I decided to call it this name, let me have a taste. Chapter 5. When Mark picked up a bit of Dementor ashes with his fingers and put it into his mouth, his whole body was shocked. Rice with the ashes of Dementors is indeed a rice with ashes. Mark had never eaten anything so unpleasant in his 2 lifetimes. If I had to describe it, it was like taking a bite of ice slag mixed with mud, which is the ice slag in the muddy field in winter. The Dementor's ashes stuck to his mouth, exuding a strange smell, and the texture really felt like eating a mouthful of ashes. The moment he took it into his mouth, Mark wanted to spit it out. And then it happened to have a cold feeling, like ice shards that made the mucous membranes in the mouth stick to each other. The Dementor ashes bibimbap has surpassed looking up at the stars in my heart, and is enough to be called the UK's #1 dark dish. I would rather eat than eat this thing. Suddenly, Mark's expression paused slightly, and his expression became very subtle. Because a sign appeared on his system panel, indicating that Mark had obtained a mana recovery acceleration effect. This effect is seen a lot in the game Diablo 2. You can get this effect by opening a spiritual temple in the wild. After obtaining this effect, an additional 2% of maximum mana will be restored every second for a period of time. Since the mana value has naturally increased by 2 points after the upgrade, Mark's mana value has already reached 22 points even without adding any points. Calculating this, after eating the Dementor's ashes, he can recover an additional 0.44 mana points per second. If coupled with his original mana recovery speed, Mark can now recover 1 point of mana in 2 seconds. In other words, Mark can fully recover from the state of depleted magic power in 40 seconds. No wonder Mark has an appetite for Dementor ashes. For him, this is definitely a treasure that can help him in times of need. Mark didn't care about complaining anymore, and immediately carefully tore off a piece of cloth from his body and wrapped the Dementor ashes on the ground. The bit of Dementor ashes I just ate restored my energy for 10 seconds. Calculating this, the Dementor ashes I have now are enough to replenish my mana 3 times quickly. I have to find a way to use this supply to get a stable upgrade or a way to get food as soon as possible. For Mark now, he is still in crisis. He can't always use upgrading instead of eating, because the upgrading experience in Diablo 2 is incremental. He has just reached level 3 and still needs 4 experience points before reaching level 2250. Killing a Dementor can provide 500 experience points, and after Mark's level increases, the experience reward will decrease. So to reach level 4, he needs to kill at least 4 Dementors, or even 5. It is so difficult to kill a Dementor, and it is conceivable that the subsequent upgrade process will be even more difficult. What's even more troublesome is that the magical world is in a mess now, so the auras have been transferred away so that I can use magic unscrupulously in Azkaban. In a while, when the magic world calms down, I will probably be guarded with the strictest measures. As long as I show any ability to use magic, those auras from the Ministry of Magic will probably kill me directly. Mark's eyes darkened. Even if I stay in jail, there may be people who don't want me alive. I have to seize every moment. I have to find a way to escape before the Ministry of Magic turns its attention to Azkaban. Mark gritted his teeth, he had to take the risk. 5 new character attribute points, 4 points for mental strength, and 1 point for physical strength. The reason for this extra point is that Mark's mana is still too low at present, and the effect of Dementor ashes is more significant the more mana he has, so he must first increase his mana. In the Necromancer's professional template, 1 point of spirit can increase mana by 2 points. After adding 4 points of spirit, Mark's mana also increased by 8 points again, reaching 30 points. Now counting Dementor ashes, he can restore 1 mana point in almost a second, and he can finally breathe a sigh of relief for mana during the battle. After increasing his physical strength by 1 point, Mark also felt a wave of heat flowing through his body, and the coldness around him seemed to have receded a little. After all, he is still a child, and in a place like Azkaban, he still needs to pay attention to strengthening his body. Otherwise, if you fall ill, everything will be over. As the point addition ended, Mark's basic attributes also skyrocketed. He still had 1 skill point left. As for what skills he wanted to learn, Mark didn't hesitate at all. Learn the summoning spell, summon skeletons. The skill tree of the necromancer profession is divided into 3 branches: curse, poison, and bones, and summoning. Teeth are poison and bone skills, and are the only direct killing methods that Mark can learn at his current level. The increased damage is a curse, which can amplify Mark's lethality. Summoning is the essence of the necromancer. The vast sea of skeletons and various summons ensure the safety of the necromancer, allowing the necromancer to deal with any situation calmly. Some of the skills he learned before were forced by the situation, but now Mark finally revealed the core skills of this necromancer. Summoning skeletons, skill level 1, summon skeletons on corpses. Currently, the number of skeletons that can be summoned is 1, the skeleton's health is 20, and the damage is 1/2. After pointing out this skill, Mark also breathed a sigh of relief. In his initial idea, summoning skeletons was the key to his escape from Azkaban. But summoning skeletons requires corpses, which is a bit troublesome. Mark looked at the cell opposite. The corpse of the previous wizard was still there, and he could use it to summon skeletons, but the summoned skeletons were also in a cage and could not move normally. The current damage value of the skeleton is very low, and it is quite difficult to cut through such a thick iron railing. I also need a corpse in the corridor, so that the summoned skeleton can move freely in Azkaban. Mark made a decision. The skill of summoning skeletons can not only be used on people. In the Diablo 2 game, even the remains of ghosts can be used to summon skeletons as long as they are kept intact. Invite another Dementor and kill it outside the cell so that the plan can continue. There was a hint of coldness in Mark's eyes. He decided to take the risk. If we don't work hard at this time, are we going to wait for the Ministry of Magic to completely settle down and let them decide the fate of this child of death? I'm going to escape Azkaban before they come to their senses. Wizard opposite, don't blame me for desecrating your corpse. You have been tortured by Dementors. I promise that I will kill a few more Dementors to avenge you. Mark gritted his teeth and focused on the cell opposite. Summon skeleton spell, activate. A cold magic power burst out from Mark's body, and then a blood-curdling sound immediately came from the cage opposite. The corpse of the wizard was splattered with blood and flesh, and the bones inside seemed to have a will of their own. They actually stood up from the corpse and formed a skeleton soldier about 1.6 meters tall, holding a sickle and a shield. Mark's face turned pale. Partly because summoning skeletons requires 6 mana points and partly because of the bloody scene when summoning skeletons. He breathed deeply, barely holding back. Survive and escape Azkaban. I'm not qualified to think about anything else. The only thing I can do now is to try my best to be strong and use all my will and ability to escape from here. Mark took a deep breath for a while. About half an hour later, after his mana to summon the skeleton was restored, Mark began to take action. He began to recall happy events from the past in his mind, and joy radiated from his body. At the end of the corridor outside, another Dementor was attracted. At this moment, Mark punched the wall hard, using pain to make his joyful emotions dissipate. At the same time, the skeleton soldier in the opposite cell slammed his sickle on the iron railing, making a loud noise. As expected, the Dementor was attracted by the movement and came from the corridor between the cage where Mark was and the cage opposite. The scene in the cage opposite shocked the Dementors. There were scattered flesh and blood everywhere, and it was simply too horrible to look at. The Dementors guarding this place have seen countless suicide corpses, but have never seen anything like this. Moreover, there is a skeleton with no life characteristics moving in the cage. How is this going? The Dementor ignored what was behind it. Mark's eyes were extremely cold. Suddenly, at the moment when the Dementors paused, Mark took action. A red mark suddenly lit up on the Dementor, and the damage-increasing curse took effect. The Dementor changed from a virtual body to a physical entity, becoming extremely fragile. In Mark's hand, Senbei's bone teeth roared out, penetrated the Dementor's body from behind, and opened wounds on it. The Dementor, who had been transformed into a physical body by the curse that deepened the damage, was carried by his teeth and hit the railings of the cage where the skeleton soldiers were. The skeleton soldier also waved his sickle according to Mark's instructions. The bone sickle drew a white trail, cut out from the gap in the railing, struck the Dementor, opened a wound on the Dementor, and then slashed it towards the center of the corridor. At this time, Mark shot out another bone tooth, which penetrated the Dementor's body and brought it back to the railing. Then the skeleton soldier swung his scythe again. This Dementor was staggering in the corridor under the attack of Mark and the skeleton soldiers, completely unable to escape by any means. In particular, Mark's mana has increased a lot. He had already consumed a handful of Dementor's ashes before launching the attack. His mana was continuously replenished, and he did not suffer from the embarrassment of the previous battle. Under the continuous attacks, this Dementor's body was continuously torn apart. Puffs of black smoke emanated from the body, and the body became more and more tattered. Finally, after the last bone tooth penetrated its body, the Dementor became stiff and turned into a puddle of grey-black ashes in the corridor outside the cage. It worked. Mark focused his attention on the ashes of the Dementor. Although he was somewhat reluctant to part with these amazingly effective ashes, Mark still did not take them away, but kept the Dementor's corpse intact. He activated the spell again, summoning skeletons. Because his skill level is too low, he can only have one skeleton at the same time, and the skeleton in the opposite cell immediately collapsed. But another grey-black skeleton stood up amidst the ashes of the Dementors. This skeleton, not bound by bars, can move freely in Azkaban. Mark punched the wall several times, suppressing the ecstasy in his heart to avoid attracting more Dementors. He gave orders to the skeleton. Go explore outside. I need to know what's going on in Azkaban. Click, click. The grey-black skeleton took steps forward, carefully walking towards the end of the corridor under Mark's control. A glimmer of hope burned in Mark's eyes. This skeleton is his first step to escape from Azkaban. Chapter 6. Click, click. Under the control of Mark, the skeleton soldiers carefully walked outside and began the process of exploring Azkaban. It walked around the corner of the corridor and headed towards the outskirts of Azkaban's cell. Along the way, the entire Azkaban was silent and in a dead silence. Mark shared the perspective of the skeleton soldier and observed the situation in the cell. There are still some prisoners in the cells here, but almost all of them are in an extremely numb state. There is no light of hope in their eyes, but a look of despair. After entering Azkaban, more than 90% of people will not survive the first year. This statement is not made casually. Being in a situation where Dementors suck away happiness and hope for a long time, no matter how strong a person is, they will weaken and become weak from the inside. But in the original book, Bella, the most loyal Death Eater, stayed in Azkaban for more than 10 years, and even had the ability to escape from prison in the end. How is this possible? Just more than 10 years of poor diet and cold environment can destroy their bodies, not to mention the influence of Dementors. The huge wealth of these Death Eater families flashed through Mark's mind, and he remembered the financial situation of the Ministry of Magic, and it suddenly became clear to him. It seems that the wealth of these Death Eater families has saved their lives. The Ministry of Magic needs their wealth, and these people can live for so many years in exchange for wealth. However, these prisoners, including Mark, did not receive such good treatment. Staying here will sooner or later cause irreversible damage. Mark glanced at the prisoners, who showed no reaction at all to the skeleton soldiers passing by outside the cage. In other words, their spirits and vision have been so damaged that they have difficulty reacting to the outside world. Mark felt a pity in his heart. I originally wanted to use their magic, but now it seems that these prisoners are a burden, so I have to leave them here. I still have to rely on myself to escape from prison. The skeleton soldier continued to walk. After walking through a stone door in front of him, the skeleton soldier came to a hall. This seems to be the middle area between the cells on the upper level and this level, where the guards gather. The skeleton soldier saw 5 hooded figures. The moment the skeleton soldier appeared, these 5 Dementors also looked over at the same time. Mark was suddenly startled and cried out in his heart. If this skeleton soldier was destroyed, his previous efforts would be in vain. Escape from Azkaban will also become more difficult. And just when he was about to let the skeleton soldiers flee, the 5 Dementors turned their heads again, as if they didn't see the skeleton soldiers. Mark stopped giving instructions for the skeleton soldiers to escape. He was filled with doubts and carefully maneuvered the skeleton soldiers towards a Dementor. Still no reaction from the Dementors. Mark tentatively asked the skeleton soldier to push the Dementor, and something incredible happened to him. The skeleton soldier was able to push the Dementor without any hindrance. You must know that Dementors are originally incorporeal bodies, and they will only transform into entities after being damaged and cursed. Now that I am only controlling skeleton soldiers, why can I still encounter this Dementor? In a flash of thought, the ashes left behind after the death of the Dementors flashed through Mark's mind. This skeleton soldier was summoned from the corpse of the Dementor, and its body was mixed with some of the ashes of the Dementor. Could it be that because of this, the Dementors would not attack it and could still be touched by it? After discovering this, a light flashed in Mark's eyes. If so, that would be much more convenient. After testing for a while and discovering that the Dementors did not respond to any movements of the skeleton soldiers, Mark simply ignored the Dementors and continued to control the skeleton soldiers to detect the nearby situation. At the back of the hall, after walking up a flight of stairs, you enter the floor closest to the entrance of Azkaban. The number of Dementors in this layer has obviously increased. There is a Dementor wandering every certain distance, and from time to time, several Dementors gather together to move. The area of this floor was also much larger than the one below. Mark controlled the skeleton soldiers and walked for a while, but still did not find the exit. At this time, his system panel also reminded him that the skeleton soldiers were about to leave the range that he could control. Mark had no choice but to control the skeleton soldiers to return, thinking about how to escape from Azkaban. First of all, I have to get out of the cell. If I don't get out of the cell, everything will be in vain. Mark looked at the iron bars in front of him. If he didn't get rid of this thing, he would have no choice but to be locked in the cell. And if you want to get this thing open, it will definitely make a lot of noise, which will definitely attract the Dementors. He can only deal with one Dementor at most. If 2 of the 5 Dementors in the hall on this floor are attracted, he will be in trouble. We have to find a way to prevent Dementors from entering this area. An idea flashed through Mark's mind, and his eyes strangely controlled the movements of the skeleton soldiers. During the previous exploration, the skeleton soldiers discovered a room near the hall that stored some supplies, which seemed to be set up to supply the most basic needs of the prisoners on this level. Some of the things inside were necessary for Mark's next plan, so before controlling the skeleton soldiers on their way back to the city, he first asked the skeleton soldiers to go to that room. Not long after, under the watchful eyes of the 5 Dementors in the hall, the skeleton warrior returned to Mark's cell carrying a bag of things. There were some potatoes and cabbage that were about to go moldy, and 2 large pieces of bacon stained with ash, which should have been left over from the previous supply of food to the prisoners. Although it looked miserable, it was still better than rice mixed with Dementor ashes, and at least it temporarily solved Mark's food crisis. Then the skeleton warrior returned to the room and moved all the miscellaneous things stored in it to Mark's cell. There is a bag of firewood inside, which should have been left by the Aurors when they kept warm in the winter. There was also a piece of tattered and dirty fur. It was unknown what kind of animal it was, but it finally gave Mark something to keep out the cold. He had already experienced the night in Azkaban last night, and the cold feeling was really biting. Now that it was almost night, Mark felt a little warmer after wrapping himself in fur. In addition to these, there were some ropes and a broken door panel in the room. The skeleton warrior emptied the room and moved all these things back. After doing this, Mark had a strange look on his face. Under the control of Mark, the skeleton warrior lifted the broken door panel and stood at the corner of the narrow corridor like a warrior holding a giant shield, blocking the corner tightly. That's right, Mark is about to get stuck. Mark came up with this idea after discovering that skeleton warriors could stop Dementors. Use the skeleton warrior to block the corner and block the Dementors. In this way, no matter how big a movement you make, they will not be able to get through, and you can easily break open the cell. A white bone tooth condensed into shape in Mark's hand, and then roared and bombarded the iron railing. When a crisp sound came from the cell, and the Dementors in the hall on this floor immediately reacted and rushed towards the cell where Mark was. There is a sense of greed in their eyes. Whenever there is such a movement, it means that someone wants to escape from prison. As for the jailbreakers, they are allowed to eat their souls directly. This is a delicious meal. However, just as the 5 Dementors rushed towards the cell, at the corner of the cell corridor, a grey-black skeleton blocked the door. The Dementors rushed forward, and then directly collided with the skeleton warrior, and were directly bounced away. They could not shake the skeleton warrior at all. The skeleton warrior's eyes were flashing with faint will-o'-the-wisps, and he blocked the place as firmly as a mountain, creating a safe space for Mark. When there was another crisp sound, and the 5 Dementors rioted, and the cold breath surged out from them, covering the skeleton warrior. However, the skeleton warrior still held the door panel firmly, without wavering at all. It has no soul and no emotions. The methods used by Dementors to attack have no effect on skeleton warriors. Mark's eyes were deep, and the bones and teeth in his hand flew out one after another and hit the iron railing. The taste of freedom is just ahead. Chapter 7. When clear crashing sounds sounded one after another in the cage. The Dementors guarding this floor tried their best to slam forward, but they were still unable to shake the skeleton warrior blocking the corner. Mark kept using his teeth, and the white bone teeth hit the railings of the cell one after another. Each time, they would leave a white mark on it and get some iron filings on it. After releasing nearly 10 tooth spells in a row, Mark stopped moving and looked a little ugly. The sturdiness of the railings was beyond his imagination. The spell just hit only a little bit of iron powder on it, leaving a gap the size of a hair on the railing. If you rely on yourself to cast the tooth spell alone, you may have to cast it continuously for a day to create an opening that you can pass through. Including the time to recover mana and rest, I'm afraid it will take a week to complete. By that time, maybe the orders from the Ministry of Magic will come back, and it will be too late. Mark's eyes searched left and right, passing over the firewood on the ground, and his eyes lit up slightly. Maybe there is a way? There has been no such noise in the cell for more than an hour. The Dementors guarding this floor are not as greedy as before, but they have not left. They still stay at this corner, with a cold breath emanating from them. In the cell, Mark rubbed his palms quickly, and a sharpened piece of wood also rotated rapidly with his palms. The tip of the log was sunk in a shallow pit dug out of a log, and a small clump of dry hair lay beside it. Mark was thankful in his heart. Fortunately, I used to study materials science, and I also liked watching island survival. After so many years, I finally remember some useful knowledge. These iron bars are firmly fixed in the upper and lower slots. Cast iron has a large coefficient of thermal expansion, so as long as its temperature is raised, it will expand. At this time, due to the constraints of the slot, the internal stress of the iron railing will increase. It will be more prone to stress concentration inside it, making it easier to break when it is impacted by external forces. This is a mechanical explanation. From a material science perspective, rapid cooling after heating will make iron railings more susceptible to damage. Fire heating will cause part of the ferrite in the iron railing to transform into austenite. If it is suddenly cooled at this time, a hard but fragile martensite structure will be created inside. After this treatment, although the hardness of the material will increase, the brittleness will also increase. To give an inappropriate example, it is like glass. Glass is extremely hard, but very fragile and extremely easy to break. While Mark was having many thoughts in his mind, a cloud of smoke came from under the firewood in his hand, an orange-red fire burned on the hair, and then slowly spread to the firewood. Mark breathed a sigh of relief and spent nearly an hour raising a strong bonfire under the iron railing. Peeling, peeling, sparks kept jumping, and heat gradually rose in the prison where Mark was. Under the raging flames, the temperature of the iron railings located outside the flames was also rising. Mark tried it several times with his hands. After finding that the temperature had reached a stable value, he did not wait any longer. In the absence of an air box and a heating furnace, the temperature of firewood is not high, and is far inferior to that of an alcohol blowtorch. Don't wait any longer if the temperature reaches the current level. Otherwise, if the temperature drops slowly instead of suddenly, the iron railings will not be weakened but will be strengthened. Then Mark will be really dumbfounded. Mark has prepared water. There is a water container in his cell, which contains a little water. Water is still dripping from Mark's cell, but it is now half full. When the railing was burning hot, Mark took a deep breath, grabbed the container and poured a ladle of it onto the iron railing. Laugh, laugh. There was a hissing sound, and bursts of white gas suddenly appeared on the iron railings. The hot iron railings were rapidly cooled by the water, and due to thermal expansion and contraction, extremely strong stress was generated inside them. Mark was also very particular about where he splashed water. He did not splash water everywhere, but sprinkled water unevenly for cooling. Originally, during quenching, it must be cooled evenly, otherwise some places will be hot and some will be cold, which will easily lead to cracks in the material. Now Mark went the other way and took advantage of this to deliberately create defects inside the iron railings. Taking advantage of this moment, Mark didn't waste any time. His mana poured out, and bone teeth struck the railing one after another. When? A crisp sound rang out in the cell again, and the Dementors on this level became violent again and rushed against the skeleton warrior, but they were still firmly intercepted by the skeleton warrior. Mark's eyes were fixed on the iron railings. He has thought of all the ways he can think of. If he can't break the iron railing, Mark will have no choice but to leave his fate to others to judge. But luck betrays people, but knowledge does not. Mark studied materials science in his previous life, but later changed industries in order to make money. At that time, he didn't even know the use of this knowledge. He never expected that this knowledge would be used after traveling through time. It could be regarded as a feedback left to him in his previous life. When the bone teeth bombarded the iron railings, cracks like spider webs spread out, and the effect was hundreds of times better than before. Mark bombarded the railings again and again, and consumed all the remaining Dementor ashes on his body, seizing the few vulnerable moments of the iron railings to attack. Dang! A minute later, a cross-section crack appeared on the first iron railing. Under the bombardment of a bone tooth, the iron railing fell to the ground with a clang. Then came the second one, and then the third one. 5 minutes later, in front of Mark, he finally opened a hole in the iron railings that had been blocking him. Mark took a deep breath and put out the bonfire. He couldn't wait for the temperature here to drop a little, so he bent over and climbed out of the small opening. When he bent down and got out of the cell, Mark finally believed what the high school teachers said back then. If you learn mathematics, physics, and chemistry, you won't be afraid even if you travel through time. Finally, after coming to the world of Harry Potter and falling into the Devil's Gambit, Mark regained his freedom. His eyes were deep and he looked at the Dementors stuck by the skeleton warriors at the corner of the corridor. Mark chanted in a low voice. The damage deepens. Red marks fell on them, transforming them into fragile corpses. Then a cold light flashed in Mark's eyes, and pale bone teeth flew out. The skeleton warrior also suddenly erupted, and the bone sickle in his hand drew a trajectory like a crescent moon. Go away. Chapter 8. The 5 Dementors on this level blocked Mark's only way to the outside world. They are crazy and greedy, trying to break through the skeleton warriors and catch Mark, who is about to escape from prison. And Mark's eyes also flashed with murderous intent. The Dementors wanted to kill him, so why didn't he want to kill these Dementors? He finally escaped from the cage, and now it was these Dementors that were blocking his freedom. Mark didn't want to suffer in prison for so many years like Sirius in the original book. Sirius, who was strong and powerful in magic, stayed in Azkaban for 12 years, and then his body was completely destroyed. He was as thin as a skeleton, and his whole body suffered irreversible damage. Mark is only 6 years old now, and he is already a fragile child. Staying here for even a month would most likely turn him into a consumptive man who would suffer from the disease for decades to come. Although he doesn't know why he came to this world, Mark wants to survive, and he wants to live better than anyone else. The magic power in Mark's body tilted, and bone teeth exploded from his hands, flying towards the narrow corner. Bones and teeth were connected into a line, whistling and piercing through the Dementors at the front. Because the corner was too narrow, these Dementors were suddenly transformed into fragile entities by the curse of deepening damage. They even had no room to dodge before they were pierced by bone teeth and turned into a bunch of candied haws. And the skeleton warrior is not just blocking like before. Under Mark's instructions, the skeleton warrior's eyes began to flash with faint will-o'-the-wisps. It grabbed the 2 closest Dementors with its left hand, and the bone sickle held in its right hand swung out a white trajectory, whistling and slashing into the Dementors' bodies. The traumatized Dementor roared and struggled desperately. They fully use their ability to absorb positive emotions, but the skeleton warriors have no emotions and are not affected at all. The bone sickle in its hand is extremely regular, like the coldest machine movement. It is swung forward from the same angle every time, accurately causing maximum damage. As for Mark, he had already memorized the range of influence of Dementor's abilities before, and all his attacks were launched outside the range of influence of Dementors. In the following time, Mark and the skeleton warriors caused heavy damage to the Dementors at this corner. Mark used his magic power without hesitation and used the tooth spell 10 times in a row. Coupled with the damage and deepening curse, and the damage value of the skeleton warrior and the teeth, which were almost the same, the 2 Dementors at the front were reduced to ashes in a series of attacks. 2 messages flashed on Mark's system panel. Kill X2 Dementors by leapfrogging, gain 1000 experience points, and there are still 1250 experience points before the next level. The 3 Dementors at the back were also seriously injured. Their bodies were torn apart, bursts of black smoke escaped from them, and they looked like they were about to fall apart. However, at this time, the duration of the damage-increasing curse had expired, and Mark's mana had been exhausted and he could no longer launch attacks. The 3 Dementors took advantage of this moment and immediately escaped from the corner and floated towards the upper level. The situation at this level has exceeded their response. The attack they just suffered even made them a little afraid, fearing that they would be destroyed by an enemy they had never encountered before. They went to find reinforcements, and there were at least dozens of Dementors in the prison on the upper level of Azkaban. When they came down together, the 3 Dementors were convinced that the human who attacked them would eventually have his soul sucked into nothingness. When the 3 Dementors escaped, Mark was already prepared. He took a deep breath, a cold light flashed in his eyes, and immediately let the skeleton warrior catch up. The purpose of chasing after them was not to kill these 3 Dementors. The damage done by the skeleton warrior was too low, and it was impossible to kill these 3 Dementors who were bent on escaping. Mark's instruction to the skeleton warrior was to let it block the only way to get here from the previous level to buy himself some time. I still need some preparations, but as long as I complete them, I will have the capital to rely on the terrain to deal with dozens of Dementors. The skeleton warriors faithfully fulfilled Mark's orders. It quickly moved to a corner that had been detected before. It was on the only way to the next level, and the terrain was similar to the corner where it was stuck just now. After being occupied by skeleton warriors, the Dementors' movements would be hindered. Only this time, what it wants to stop is not 5 Dementors, but 30 or even 50. It was indeed easy to stop 5 Dementors before, but in Mark's estimation, the skeleton warrior's power can only hold 8 to 10 Dementors at most. If the number of Dementors increases, the skeleton warriors will be shaken by impact alone. Mark did not expect the skeleton warriors to intercept all the Dementors on the upper level. Time, just buy me some time. A crazy light flashed in Mark's eyes. He bent down, quickly collected the ashes left after the death of a Dementor, and then swallowed some with a gulp. The effect of energy recovery took place, and Mark's newly exhausted mana began to recover quickly. He then walked quickly through the Azkaban prison on this floor. It won't be long before Mark will have to face dozens of Dementors on the upper level. With such a number, even Harry Potter and others in the original book were almost in dire straits when faced with them. This was what happened after they learned the Patronus charm to specifically restrain Dementors. Mark's current strength is simply not enough to fight against this number of Dementors. But what if my level can be improved again? Mark looked at a cage, in which a prisoner of Azkaban was also being held. The wizard had broken down physically and mentally in Azkaban, and he might have died within days. A complicated look flashed across Mark's eyes, but it eventually turned cold. I will not make any excuses for my actions. Trading your lives for my hope is a selfish act. The promise I can make is to kill as many Dementors as possible and take care of your family outside. Mark glanced at the door of the prison, where the prisoner's name was engraved on an iron plate. He wrote the name down and took a deep breath. Immediately afterwards, pale bones and teeth appeared, whistling and piercing the prisoner's throat. Ho, ho, the prisoner's body twitched, and then he lost his life. A prompt appeared on Mark's system panel. Mark gained 700 experience points and was still 550 experience points away from the next level. He did not stop, but quickly came to the cage where the next prisoner was. After writing down the name, a bone tooth roared out and also penetrated the prisoner's body. 600 experience points were obtained from the panel, and a golden light flashed over Mark. He was promoted to level 4, and his entire condition was replenished to its best. His current experience points are 3,800, and he still needs 4125 experience points before he can reach the next level. As the level increases, more and more experience points are required for upgrading. Mark didn't even hesitate for a second. The 5 attribute points he just got were all added to his spirit. His mana value exceeded 40 points and he was able to use the tooth spell 20 times in a row. As for the skill points obtained from the upgrade, he immediately added them to the skill of summoning skeletons. Summon skeletons, level 2, summon skeleton warriors from corpses to fight for you. The number of skeletons you can control is 2, and the defense of the skeleton warriors increases slightly. This is the reason why the skeleton summoning skill is the core skill of the Necromancer. In the first 3 levels, the number of skeleton warriors that the Necromancer can control will increase by 1 for each level. In the early stages of the game, having 1 more skeleton warrior will drastically improve combat efficiency. Regarding Mark's current situation, Summoning skeletons was obviously the best solution, so he upgraded this skill to 1 level without any hesitation. After upgrading the skill, Mark immediately came to the ashes of the remaining Dementor and released the summoning skeleton skill here. The second skeleton warrior also rose from the ashes, walked to the location of the first skeleton warrior, and blocked the place with it. At this moment, the Dementors on the upper level who were heading here also felt the situation of the prisoners on the lower level. Their lives are disappearing. To the Dementors, every prisoner is precious food. The Dementors can only thrive and survive if they rely on humans. The accidental death of every prisoner is a great loss to them. And just in a short period of time, 2 prisoners on the lower level suddenly died, which simply made them crazy. The Dementors in Azkaban are on a rampage. They sped up, and dozens of Dementors surged towards the lower level like a tide. Boom! But on the only way, they suddenly collided with 2 skeleton warriors. Chapter 9. Click, click. The 2 skeleton warriors supported each other and resisted the surging tide of Dementors at this corner. However, under the combined impact of dozens of Dementors, the skeleton warrior was still pushed back bit by bit, and even ravines were created on the ground. Even if the number increases by 1, the skeleton warriors can still only resist for a short time in front of the absolute majority of Dementors. In the cell, Mark ran quickly, looking for the prisoner he had detected before. He wrote down their names and surnames, then penetrated their bodies with a bone tooth, harvesting their lives. Counting the prisoners killed by Mark before, when this layer no longer had any life breath, Mark had already killed 7 prisoners. Another golden light flashed from Mark, replenishing his condition to its best. Mark did not use the character attribute points anymore, but chose to keep them for now. With Dementor ashes around, his mana is still sufficient for the time being, and these 5 attribute points can be kept for emergencies. As for the skill points, Mark did not hesitate and clicked on the summoning skeleton skill, raising it to level 3. Summon skeletons, level 3. Summon skeletons from corpses to fight for you. The current number of controllable skeletons is 3, and the skeleton's defense power has increased slightly. After this upgrade, Mark breathed a sigh of relief. He glanced at the 7 corpses in the cage. If I make it out alive, I will keep my promise. I will do my best so that your heirs will gain fame and wealth, and your family will have glory and status. This is my promise. Then Mark stepped forward and strode towards the upper floor. Bone teeth surrounded him one after another, shining with a cold white light. Not long after, Mark came to the corner where the 2 skeleton warriors were, and glanced at the Dementors blocking his path. The Dementors also saw Mark at the same time and saw the blood stains on Mark's body. In the next cage, all 7 prisoners died. For the Dementors, the accidental death of every prisoner was a huge loss. 7 people died at once, which was already a tragic loss. They became angry and turned into a grey-black tide, roaring towards the skeleton warrior. They wanted to push the skeleton warrior away, pull out the soul of the young wizard behind him, and torture him severely to compensate for today's loss. Mark's eyes reflected the ferocious looks of the Dementors. The magic power in his body also began to surge out, exuding the aura of death. Curse, the damage deepens. A red mark shrouded the front, covering most of the Dementors, turning them into fragile entities. The tide of Dementors suddenly stopped, and the Dementors who were turned into entities seemed a little panicked. They had never felt so vulnerable. Mark's eyes were cold. He took out a handful of Dementor ashes from his arms and swallowed it, and the magic power in his body began to recover rapidly. The teeth surrounding him roared out like meteors, one bone tooth after another penetrated the tide of Dementors, and then were submerged by the grey-black body of the Dementors. 1, 2, 3. Mark didn't seem to get tired. The bones and teeth fired from his hands stubbornly penetrated the Dementor's body. The eyes of the 2 skeleton warriors also lit up with faint will-o'-the-wisps, and they waved the bone sickles in their hands towards the group of Dementors. Call out! The sharp bone teeth tore the cursed Dementor's body apart, and the black energy emitted from the Dementor's body condensed into billowing black smoke, filling the passage. Laugh! The 2 skeleton warriors also swung the bone scythe accurately, smashing the bone scythe into the Dementor's body, and then tore it apart fiercely, causing larger wounds. The Dementors under attack made a sound that was unclear whether it was a scream or a sound of hatred. The voices of dozens of Dementors gathered together to form a hissing whisper that enveloped a huge area. This kind of whisper kept drilling into Mark's head, causing his happy memories to gradually dissipate, and a cold feeling spread in his heart. Mark bit the tip of his tongue fiercely, with a fierce gaze. The bones and teeth in his hand did not stop, but kept flying forward. He tried to control the trajectory of the fangs so that the fang could attack the same Dementors. It is better to cut off one finger than to injure the enemy's 10 fingers. The skeleton warrior was also under the control of Mark, and he slashed at a Dementor with 2 bone scythes at the same time. Boom! After a stalemate for several seconds, a Dementor collapsed under the attack and turned into a ball of black ashes and fell to the ground. A light suddenly flashed in Mark's eyes, and he growled at the ashes left by the Dementor. Summon the skeleton! Click, click! The third skeleton warrior stood up from the ashes, and the grey-black bone sickle swept forward. The stalemate was broken. The 3 skeleton warriors used their strength together, and Mark kept using curses and fangs. The group of Dementors actually seemed like the tide lapping on the rocks. No matter how ferocious they were, the skeleton warriors remained motionless, and Mark, who was under protection, was unscathed. Get out of my way! Mark roared, and the bones and teeth connected into a line, moving through the crowd of Dementors at an even faster speed than before. The 3 skeleton warriors also started to push forward together, and even pushed back the Dementor tide little by little. They were squeezing forward little by little, pushing against dozens of Dementors and squeezing out of the passage. There are many figures in the narrow passage, which can be called a chaotic dance of demons. There was grey-black smoke floating in the air, which made you choke if you inhaled it. In this passage, everything seems to be crowded together, and every step forward feels exhausting. Mark felt inexplicably familiar with this scene. Isn't this similar to being crowded on a train during the spring festival? At this moment, a limerick floated in Mark's heart. As long as the train is more crowded, Azkaban has it your way. If there is a rush for seats on the subway, don't worry about the crowd of Dementors. After an unknown amount of time passed, one message after another appeared on Mark's system panel. The resistance in front of Mark suddenly lightened up. He and the skeleton warrior entered a hall that was much wider than the passage. The exit from Azkaban is not far ahead. At this time, the Dementors also dispersed, surrounding Mark and the others. It's just that each of them has wounds on their bodies, and some are even on the verge of collapse. There is even the slightest fear in their eyes when they look at Mark, and they don't dare to step forward easily. Mark gasped for air, his clothes already soaked with sweat. In this open area, it was no longer possible to use the terrain to deal with the Dementors. Then we can only use other methods to get through the last distance. He looked at the Dementors surrounding him, then raised his left hand and slowly pulled down his sleeve. The intertwined pattern of skulls and snakes caught the eyes of the Dementors, causing them to commotion. Even Dementors recognize this pattern. It is the famous mark of the Dark Lord, a mark that can only be possessed by the most loyal followers of the Dark Lord. Mark looked around. Although his body was young, his eyes revealed a cold look from the past few days of training. I know you understand, and I want to talk to you. I was regarded as the son of death by the Death Eaters, stamped with the mark of the Dark Lord by the Dark Lord, and designated as the next Dark Lord. I am destined to bring changes to this magical world. I am speaking to you now as the next Dark Lord. I, the son of death, have a dream. Chapter 10. I, the son of death, have a dream. I dream that one day, the beings in the darkness will also have a savior. I dream that one day, this world will usher in a new order. Under this order, vampires, werewolves, giants, and Dementors can live freely in the magical world and no longer have to worry about food and reproduction. This is the dream of my son of death. Mark showed the mark of the dark devil on his hand and looked around at the Dementors with a calm look. He displayed the dark mark in front of the Dementors and said emotionally, "My ideals are feared by the outside world, so I was thrown into Azkaban. But you have also seen that I have extraordinary talents granted by God. Even at such a young age, I still have unique abilities. In time, neither the Dark Lord nor Dumbledore will be my opponent. If I can leave Azkaban, one day in the future, I will bring the magical world under my rule and create a new order. And if you can help me, I promise that when that day comes, the Dementor tribe will never worry about food or the reproduction of the tribe, and you will all be able to live in peace and ease." Then bones and teeth appeared around him, and 3 skeleton soldiers also held the bone scythe, looking at the Dementors with ghostly fire in their eyes. Mark's next words contained a hint of threat. "If you insist on killing me here, I don't doubt your ability, but the damage caused may exceed your imagination. First of all, each of you may be subject to my onslaught and will dissipate as a result. The deaths of your companions have proven this. I have a way to kill you." Secondly, even if you are not afraid of death. Mark moved his gaze to the prison on this floor. There were many more prisoners on this floor than on the next floor. This was the most important source of food for the Dementors. Before I die, I can guarantee that I will kill more than half of the prisoners here. At that point, I'm curious, what will the Dementors do to survive the rest of their time? Mark's eyes flashed coldly. Then let's decide. Are you going to risk the future of the tribe and fight to the death with me, or are you going to let me leave and get my promise? When Mark spoke like this, there was a commotion among the Dementors. They are not creatures without intelligence. On the contrary, they even have the intelligence to communicate with people and sign agreements. They understood what Mark meant and were judging the correctness of Mark's words. Dementors do not have any sympathy or anger towards the death of their own kind. What can affect them is only food and reproduction. On these two matters, after a short discussion, these Dementors reached a consensus. Mark's threat just now is indeed unacceptable to the Dementor clan. They don't care about the death of their companions, but they care about the survival of themselves and their group. Risking oneself to be killed and the food of the tribe to be greatly reduced, to offend such a blessed son of death is indeed a thing that has both disadvantages and disadvantages. The Dementors communicated in their own languages for a while. During this period, Mark's palms were sweating. He was thinking that in the original book, the Death Eater's bargaining chip to win over the Dementors was to allow them to hunt freely outside Azkaban. Since he was considered the son of death by the Death Eaters, and he had already demonstrated his abilities in front of the Dementors, it was naturally possible to reach a deal with the Dementors and leave Azkaban with their help. This was his gamble. If he failed, he was ready to fight. And if it succeeds, after leaving Azkaban, I will be able to leap in the sea, and only when I am full can I fulfill my promise to the Dementors. When Mark was a little nervous, the Dementors finally reached a unified opinion. A Dementor that was taller than the same kind floated over and looked at Mark with cold eyes. A hoarse and harsh voice came from under the cloak, "Son of Death, remember your promise. When you rule the magical world, Dementors must have the right to hunt and reproduce freely." Mark nodded calmly, "Okay." The hoarse voice of the Dementor representative sounded, "Then, we will not prevent you from leaving." Only then did the Dementors retreat slightly, making way for Mark to lead out of Azkaban. The Dementor representative pointed in one direction, across the ocean, "That's where the magic world is. Apparition is forbidden in Azkaban. You must cross the water and wind on your own. Remember your promise, son of death, or you will be cursed by the Dementors." Mark nodded slightly, took a deep breath, and stepped into the passage to the outside world under the protection of 3 skeleton warriors. Boom, boom. The black sea water roared in the strong wind, setting off waves and crashing on the rocks of the desert island of Azkaban. As the most heavily guarded prison in the wizarding world, Azkaban is shrouded in a sea that is always windy. Now, on this black coast, 3 pale skeleton warriors are carrying things. A simple raft composed of door panels, ropes, and stones was placed on the shore. Mark took a deep breath and looked at the roaring sea. Facing the power of nature, none of his current skills are of much use, but he can only bite the bullet. The Death Eaters in the original book did not have wands and could not use magic spells. Since they were able to escape from this ocean, it means that this ocean is not too wide. They can escape, and my conditions are better than theirs, so they will definitely succeed. Before boarding the raft, Mark roasted 2 potatoes and a piece of bacon over the fire. It was probably the first hot meal he had eaten in the past few days. This cheered him up a lot and made him feel warmer all over. Then he added 5 of the 2 character attribute points to strength, and the remaining 3 points to physical strength. In order to avoid drowning due to exhaustion during the sea crossing, there is no way to add such points. After making these preparations, Mark got on the raft. He tied himself to the raft to avoid being knocked directly into the ocean by the bumpy waves. For insurance, a skeleton warrior was still holding down Mark on the raft to ensure that Mark was safe and sound. The other 2 skeleton warriors were fixed on both sides of the raft. After entering the sea, they will work hard as oars to push the raft forward. Only then did Mark roar, "Let's go!" The skeleton warriors pushed the raft into the sea. They turned their joints and half of their bodies rotated, stirring the seawater like a propeller, and gradually took the raft away from the coast. At this time, strong winds were blowing, causing waves to surge into the sky. Boom! Under the waves, white bones formed a boat, carrying Mark to ride the wind and waves. Make a boat out of bones and soar into the sky. Chapter 11. North of England, near Cape Duncansby on the North Sea. The place is blown by the cold wind from the North Sea all year round, and the waves crash on the rugged coast, thus etching caves extending in all directions on the sea cliffs. On this day, Marin crouched down and walked on the cliffs of the coast. She moved extremely carefully, occasionally using protruding stones to cover her figure. In front of Marin, a man with a strong build and a fierce look in his eyebrows was also walking on the cliff. His target seemed to be a certain cave on the cliff. Marin looked at the man's back, with a trace of hatred in her eyes, and followed behind. She is 16 years old and a resident of the nearby town of Kykan. Their family has been running an old machinery factory for several generations and is a very prestigious family in this remote town. The family has always lived a prosperous life. The Kimmel family in the next town also runs a machinery factory, but the quality of the machinery they produce is rough, and their business has been suppressed by the Marin family, who are very hostile to the Marin family. But recently, Marin's parents mysteriously disappeared during a walk after dinner, completely disappearing from the town. The patrol police in the town searched for a long time, but they could only conclude that perhaps they walked to the beach, then accidentally fell off the cliff and were swept into the sea by the waves. Marin was heartbroken, but she never believed such rhetoric. She decided to investigate the truth herself. At the same time, the Kimmel family also began to poach workers from the Marin family machinery factory, and began to use various means to suppress the Marin family's business. In just 1 month, Marin's machinery factory was unable to operate, and all skilled workers were lost to the Kimmel family. During this period, Marin supported the operation of the machinery factory while using her own methods to investigate the situation of the Kimmel family. It really made her find some strange places. George Kimmel, the patriarch of the Kimmel family, should be almost 60 years old this year, and it is said that he is still suffering from illness. But recently, he made a miraculous recovery and his health has improved significantly. The family's personal doctor said that George can now eat a kilogram of steak every day, and it is the kind with blood. According to Marin's investigation, the reason why George Kimmel's health condition improved was after he went for a ride near a rock wall on the coast. When George came back late that night, he had a high fever, which lasted for 2 days. When the fever subsided, he became uncharacteristically strong. From then on, people from the Kimmel family would go to the rock walls on the coast from time to time, sometimes bringing various things with them. Marin believes that there must be something wrong with the Kimmel family, and it must be related to this rock wall. Today she was following Paul Kimmel, the eldest son of the Kimmel family, in order to see what the Kimmel family was doing here recently. Perhaps my parents were kidnapped by them and imprisoned in the cave on the sea cliff. If we can find evidence of their crimes, maybe my parents can be found and the family's machine shop can be saved. With this thought in mind, Marin followed quietly. But she didn't notice that the wind direction had quietly changed during her actions. Originally she was on the downwind side, but as time and space changed, she gradually came upwind, while Paul was on the downwind side. For humans, such changes have no impact. But Paul seemed to sense something from the wind. His nose moved twice, and then a fierce light flashed in his eyes. Before Marin could react, Paul suddenly turned around and rushed over with extraordinary speed and reaction. The rugged cliffs seemed to have no obstacles for Paul. He seemed to be on flat ground and his movements were incredibly fast. The most horrifying thing is that, perhaps in order to speed up, Paul actually got down on all fours and flew towards Marin like a wild beast. It's really scary for a human to run like a beast. Within a moment, Paul rushed in front of Marin. Marin looked at Paul in fear, unable to move. Paul's fingernails had long tips, and the canine teeth in his mouth began to protrude, making them look strangely long. There was a stinky smell all over him, and he felt like some kind of dangerous beast. Paul looked at Marin and smiled evilly. "You shouldn't have followed me here. There's no one here." He grabbed Marin's neck and dragged Marin towards the cliff like a weak rabbit. "There's no one here, no one will see it. After you are thrown down, the sea water will take away your body. You will disappear from the town like your parents, and you will be considered to have fallen off the cliff due to excessive grief, or even considered to have committed suicide." His eyes slowly changed, gradually turning into a kind of dark green pupils. "That feeling is like the eyes of a wolf." Marin tried desperately to shake Paul's hand, but Paul's strength was so amazing that she couldn't even open a finger. Paul grinned grimly. "Girls like you are that adult's favorite. But you're lucky. The master has left here temporarily, so you can leave a whole body behind and don't have to suffer the same torture as your parents." After saying that, Paul laughed ferociously and was about to throw Marin off the cliff. But suddenly, his ears twitched slightly, as if he heard something. There was a crashing sound from below the sea cliff, and something hit the sea cliff. Paul also smelled a special smell in his nose. The smell was like long dead bones, with a cold smell of death. Click, click. At the top of the nearby cliff, several arms made of white bones suddenly climbed onto the cliff. Then 3 skeleton warriors whose bodies were made of white bones climbed up from under the cliff, with faint will-o'-the-wisps flashing in their eyes. After climbing onto the cliff, the skull warriors turned their heads and looked at Paul. The will-o'-the-wisp suddenly became stronger. Click, click, they waved their bone scythes and attacked Paul simultaneously. Paul was shocked and angry, having never expected such a thing to appear. He no longer cared about Marin at this time and quickly dropped Marin. Paul roared from his mouth, black hair grew on his body, and his nails and teeth became sharp and long, preparing to attack the skeleton warrior. At this moment, a voice sounded from below the cliff. The damage deepens. A red mark was printed on Paul's body. When the red mark fell, even Paul, who had been controlled by animal nature, felt extremely dangerous, as if he had become vulnerable. Immediately afterwards, a white bone tooth flew up from the bottom of the cliff and pierced Paul's abdomen. When he was stiff for a while, the bone scythes of the 3 skeleton corpses also fell on Paul, leaving criss-crossing wounds on his body. In just a few seconds, Paul suffered shocking wounds on his body. But his vitality seemed to be extremely strong, and his skin was extremely tough. These wounds seemed shocking, but in fact they did not pose a fatal threat to him. But the pain also drove Paul crazy. Roar! Paul roared wildly, and his whole body made a clicking sound, and the speed of change suddenly accelerated. In just a moment, he transformed from a tall man of nearly 2 meters into a monster covered in black hair and nearly 2.5 meters tall. The monster glanced at the skeleton warrior, then quickly got rid of the siege of the skeleton warrior, entered a cave, and then disappeared without a trace. Marin's pupils were dilated and she couldn't believe what she was seeing. Isn't the monster that Paul just turned into the legendary werewolf? Click, click, the 3 skeleton warriors who stayed in place surrounded Marin. Just when Marin was extremely frightened, there was a sound of footsteps, and the 3 skeleton warriors stepped aside. A pale-faced boy climbed up from the cliff, all wet, and walked towards Marin. A bone sickle was gently placed on Marin's neck. "Miss, I just saved your life. Perhaps you should invite me home for a cup of hot tea." Chapter 12. Goodoo, goodoo. The coffee bubbles in the French press, and the rich oil comes out of it, exuding an alluring aroma. The sliced bread is toasted in a bread machine until browned on both sides, and then spread with jam. The red sausage is constantly turned over in the frying pan, and the olive oil and the fat released from the red sausage itself are mixed together, exuding an aroma that makes your fingers lick your fingers. When the red sausage is fried until the surface is slightly burnt, that's when it has the most flavor. The curtains at Marin's house were drawn tightly to ensure that outsiders could not see what was going on inside. Inside the house, the aroma of coffee mixed with the aroma of bread and grilled sausages, creating a hungry smell. Marin poured the coffee into the cup cautiously, then packed the bread and sausages on a tray and placed them on the dining table in front of Mark. Mark is now wearing pajamas and has changed out of the clothes he wore in Azkaban. During his journey across the ocean, the clothes had become soaked and torn and could no longer be worn. When he smelled the fragrance, Mark's stomach rumbled. The corners of Marin's mouth twitched, but she still didn't dare to show any expression. She was really not sure whether the boy in front of her was a human being or some kind of supernatural creature. After all, what she experienced today was enough to overturn her worldview. First, Paul, the eldest son of the Kimmel family, turned into a werewolf and wanted to kill himself. Then he was rescued by several skeleton monsters. Then, it turns out that these skeleton monsters are the child's subordinates. Then he was kidnapped by this child and had to take him to his home, and now he is cooking for him? God, this is a crazy dream. Mark had no time to care what Marin thought. After seeing the food being brought to him, Mark's mouth continued to secrete saliva. God knows how he got here these days. In the first 2 days after traveling to this world, I didn't even eat anything and stayed in the Death Eater's headquarters. When he woke up, only Dumbledore gave himself a few pieces of cheese to eat. And in Azkaban, the one who ate the most was the ashes of Dementors. The taste was something Mark didn't even want to recall now. It was like a nightmare. Then during the process of crossing the ocean, Mark was also hungry. After finally encountering a fish in the sea, he was so hungry that he couldn't care about anything and just gnawed the fish alive. The smelly feeling is really disgusting. After much calculation, the best thing Mark ate these days was the roasted potatoes and bacon when he was about to go to sea. But now, I can finally eat something for others. Mark picked up the cup of coffee. There is a layer of rich oil floating on the surface of the coffee. You can feel the delicate taste with a gentle sip, and the aroma of the coffee also penetrates into your mouth. Then he slowly sipped the remaining small cup of coffee into his mouth. Bitter, astringent, sour, sweet, and fragrant, these 5 taste levels of coffee spread in his mouth in turn. This small cup of Italian coffee was so delicious that Mark almost cried. Oh my god, I finally don't have to drink the cold and biting dripping water from the cell, I can drink something warm. Then Mark picked up a piece of bread with a knife and fork. After baking in the bread machine, the bread is very different from when it is cold. Now the bread is browned on both sides and hot and transparent. When you bite into it, the unique aroma of bread spreads in your mouth. The taste of wheat and flour brings a feeling of satiety and pleasure. The taste of the bread is also excellent. After baking, the outside of the bread is crispy, and the inside becomes fluffy because it has been heated. It is really hard to stop after one bite. When you eat the middle of the bread, the jam that is spread thinly bursts out with a sweet and sour taste and a delicate texture, which mixes with the flavor of the bread itself, making the deliciousness even more sublime. The toasted bread is really great, 10,000 times better than rice mixed with Dementor ashes. While chewing the bread, Mark cut off a piece of red sausage. The rich aroma of meat pours out from the casings, and the hot red sausage is fried with sizzling fat. The aroma of meat is an irresistible temptation. Mark picked up a piece of red sausage and put it in his mouth to chew. The slightly salty meaty flavor explodes in your mouth. The grilled sausage exploded with oil in his mouth, and the meat juice splashed everywhere. Mark's tongue was completely conquered by the fragrant meaty aroma. With Marin's stunned expression, Mark devoured everything she served. After that, Mark ate another ice cream and drank a bottle of milk, and finally left the table with satisfaction. A deep sleepiness slowly came over me. Since the transmigration, Mark has been struggling to survive. Now he was finally able to relax a little, and his tense nerves were relieved. A feeling of tiredness welled up in his heart, and Mark's eyes were too sleepy to open. Take her to the room and lock her up. He gave orders to the skeleton warriors. The skeleton warrior locked Marin in a narrow room to prevent Marin from calling the police and causing unnecessary trouble to Mark. Then, under the protection of the skeleton warriors, Mark came to the master bedroom, lay down on the soft bed, and closed his eyes. In less than 2 seconds, Mark fell into a sweet dream. The accumulated fatigue and stress slowly dissipated with adequate sleep and rest. He didn't know how long he had slept, but in a daze, Mark seemed to have arrived at a huge tomb in his sleep. He walked down the long stairs and entered the tomb. An invisible being stood in front of Mark, heir of the necromancy school. Congratulations on escaping from prison. How does freedom feel like? Mark suddenly became alert. It doesn't feel like I'm dreaming, but rather like I'm somewhere in a dream. Moreover, I seem to have heard this voice before. The last time I was with the Death Eaters, I also heard it when I fell asleep. At the time, he claimed to be Tago, the master of the necromancy school, but he never appeared again after entering Azkaban. I thought it was a hallucination caused by excessive anxiety, but I didn't expect that he actually existed. Are you, Tajo? Mark asked tentatively. The existence nodded, yes, I am Tajio, the leader of the necromancy school. Mark was shocked because he had an impression of the name Tajio. In Diablo 2, each profession has an ultimate set, and the name of the set is the most outstanding person who has ever existed in this profession. For example, the mage suit is named after the archmage Tarisha who sealed the devil. The barbarian set is named after the immortal king. And the necromancer suit is named by Tajio. Tajio seemed to be able to detect Mark's thoughts. He nodded and said, yes, I am the Tajio you know. Before the war breaks out between the human world and heaven and hell at the same time, I spread the inheritance of the necromancy school in the void, waiting for the rebirth of the necromancy school after its destruction. This is the consciousness I left behind back then. It will dissipate 10 years after the inheritance is started. I will tell you what you want to know and help you master the inheritance of the necromancy school as soon as possible. Mark took a deep breath. Why didn't you show up when I was in Azkaban before? Why didn't you come out until I was out of danger? If I could get your help at that time, my escape would definitely be smoother. If every time you give me so-called help after I am out of danger, what is the value of it? Taegyo said calmly, my appearance will consume your physical strength and spirit. When you are in Azkaban, a little extra consumption may cause you to die. Besides, this can be regarded as my test for you. If it is an incompetent person, I would rather the inheritance of the necromancy school be annihilated in the void than the achievements of the ancestors being tarnished by the incompetent person. The vigilance in Mark's eyes has not dissipated. Everyone who is given something must be asked for something. You gave me help, and what do you want from me? Taegyo's eyes showed appreciation. That's right, there are no free benefits in this world, there are only equal exchanges. My purpose in helping you is simple. First, I want you to rebuild the necromancy school that has disappeared in history and restore the glory of the necromancy school. Second, I want you to try your best to accomplish what we have not achieved, break through the shackles, ignite the divine fire, hold the throne high, establish the kingdom of God, and become a god walking on earth. Think carefully. This is different from the agreement you made with the Dementors. Once you agree, you must do your best to complete it, otherwise the curse of the necromancy school will be unbearable for you. Mark didn't hesitate for long. After a few seconds, he decisively chose to accept. From a rational perspective, Taegyo's two requirements are not a constraint for him. When these two conditions are met, you can also benefit from them. By rebuilding the necromancy school, as a descendant of Taegyo, I will certainly be able to gain many benefits and great strength. As for igniting the divine fire and becoming a god later, let's not talk about the difficulty. If you achieve it, wouldn't you be the one who benefits the most? Since there is no loss to you and you can get the help you urgently need, why not agree? Mark said firmly, okay, I agree. Taegyo then nodded and left a mark on the palm of Mark's left hand. This mark looked a bit like an eye. This is the mark of the necromancy school. You can connect to my consciousness through it. The achievements of the necromancy school are also stored here, which will be gradually opened as your level increases. Okay, it's almost time, wake up. The next moment, Mark climbed up from the bed. He thought he was dreaming, but when he raised his left hand and saw the mark on the palm of his left hand, he realized that everything was real. At this time, a strange message came from the skeleton warrior guarding Marin. Mark thought that Marin had used some means to call the police or escaped, so he quickly walked towards the room where Marin was being held. When he opened the door, he found that Marin was still inside, but something seemed wrong. Now Marin's face was flushed, and her body was still shaking involuntarily. She squeezed her legs tightly, as if she was enduring something. Woo, let me out. I want to pee. Oh, it's coming out. Chapter 13. After the door opened, Marin crossed her legs and quickly moved out with a flushed face. When passing by Mark, Marin glared at Mark, then took a breath and quickly moved to the bathroom. Mark's expression was a little embarrassed. He looked at the sky outside, it was already a little dark. She slept for a long time, and it was difficult for Marin to hold back. A skeleton warrior followed Marin and stood guard outside the bathroom, always listening to what was going on inside and ready to break in at any time. Mark promised that he had no evil intentions. This was to prevent Marin from taking advantage of the opportunity to go to the toilet and escape from the bathroom like in the movie. Fortunately, there are only a few plots in the movie. When the gurgling water inside stopped, Marin opened the door and walked out. Mark stopped Marin and asked her the whole story. Okay, young lady, it seems you are in trouble now? That werewolf, how did you get into trouble with it? Marin glanced at Mark fiercely and murmured in a low voice, my biggest trouble now is being kidnapped by you and your skeleton monster. But having said that, at least Mark did save his life from the werewolf. And besides suffocating himself in his room until he died and having a big meal at his own home, the boy didn't do anything excessive to himself. Compared to werewolves, perhaps Mark is more trustworthy. Marin still told Mark everything that had happened recently in her family, and also told Mark her observations about the Kimmel family. After listening to Marin's narration, Mark thought to himself, it seems that there is really a big trouble behind this. With the fall of Voldemort some time ago, the Death Eaters who followed Voldemort will inevitably be divided into pieces, and some may still be struggling to escape the pursuit of the Ministry of Magic. Could it be that some werewolves came to this remote town and hid in the sea cliffs to avoid being hunted? In order to obtain food, this werewolf bit the Kimmel family patriarch who came for a ride on the sea cliff, and also turned the entire Kimmel family into werewolves. The more Mark thought about it, the more he felt it was possible. If the Paul we saw before turned into a werewolf like this, then things would be really troublesome, because there is probably a werewolf wizard behind it. In fact, the werewolf hiding on the sea cliff may be Fenrir Greyback, the extremely ferocious werewolf leader in the original book. This is a freak who takes pleasure in transforming children into werewolves. James Potter's good friend Lupin, his father was bitten because he offended Fenrir, which resulted in Lupin also possessing werewolf blood. He has been a werewolf who has been discriminated against since birth. If Mark's guess is true, this is definitely a big trouble. Werewolves like Paul have little sense after transformation and only know how to use claws and teeth to attack. But Fenrir was able to maintain his sanity after transforming, and could even switch forms to use magic. Are you going to fight the werewolf wizard for Marin, or are you going to use your identity as the son of death to recover these werewolves? Or should you just leave, not get involved in these things, and go hibernate somewhere else? While he was thinking, Mark suddenly felt a chill. He opened the curtains with a feeling and saw a shadow in the woods not far from the house. 2 green lights flashed inside, exuding a cruel and bloodthirsty feeling. With the dim light, Mark judged that this was the werewolf Paul Fenrir who had been injured by him before. But in less than half a day, the wounds on Paul's body had healed, and no traces could be seen. When Mark glanced over, Paul, who had returned to his human form, also grinned with a bloodthirsty smile. There are still some meat residues visible on its exposed sharp teeth, as if it had just eaten. He made a throat-slitting gesture toward Mark and silently said, "Anyone who cannot escape will die here." Mark's eyes were cold and he told the skeleton warrior to guard the surroundings of the house. Looking at him like this, he wants to kill me as well. When the moon comes out at night, his werewolf blood will be amplified. Then it's probably time for him to launch an attack. Mark glanced at his system panel. His current level seemed to be stuck, still at level 5. But my experience value has exceeded the experience required for upgrading. Before, Mark didn't quite understand why this happened. But now, after possessing the mark of the necromancy school, he understood. This is because the necromancer will undergo a qualitative change at level 6. In terms of summoning spells, the necromancer will be able to give life to the soil and earth, creating clay demons with bodies of stone and soil, no longer bound by corpses. As for the bone and poison spells, the necromancer can condense armor composed of bones to resist any damage. Precisely because this level requires a variety of necromancer knowledge, Mark, who knew nothing about this, was naturally unable to advance and learn the next skills. Only after he has made up for the basic knowledge he lacks will subsequent upgrades be open to him. This is not something that can be accomplished overnight. Even if he has the imprint of the necromancy school, Mark will probably have to spend several years learning the basic knowledge of his school. There is no way to improve the level for the time being, and there are no materials to make magic equipment. It's really troublesome to deal with a creature as powerful and fast as a werewolf. Especially if what I think is right and there is a werewolf wizard behind the Kimmel family who can release magic, it will be even more difficult. Mark thought about countermeasures, and then he thought of something. He looked at Marin and asked, "Can you shoot or use a bow and arrow?" Marin was stunned for a moment, and then answered truthfully, "I can shoot. My father took me to practice when I was a child. We often went hunting in the wild." Mark nodded, "Then do you dare to shoot at monsters? Those monsters from the Kimmel family? With all due respect, your parents may have been poisoned by them, so do you dare to shoot them to avenge your parents?" Mark stretched out his hand and pricked his palm. The dripping blood did not fall, but was suspended in the air, forming a contract composed of blood. In the world of Diablo 2, this is a ceremony where professionals and mercenaries conclude a contract. After forming a contract, all attacks from both parties will not cause damage to the friendly party, but will penetrate directly. In addition to this advantage, Marin will also get a mercenary template, which can gain experience in the process of killing enemies like Mark, but her skills are limited and her potential is not as great as Mark's necromancer template. But compared to ordinary people, this is definitely an extraordinary power. Even Mark can only conclude this kind of contract once. If you have such courage, I will give you a chance for revenge. Mark looked at Marin honestly and told her the effect of the contract. Marin looked at the blood contract suspended in midair in shock. After hesitating for a while, she still stretched out her hand and dripped a few drops of blood onto the blood contract. "I promise you." The blood of the two people blended together, and underneath the blood contract, their true names automatically appeared. A wonderful connection links them together. Each seems to be able to feel the other's presence. Their attacks will penetrate each other without causing any harm. And a system template also appeared in front of Marin. Rogue Archer, Level 1. Has skill, Inner Vision. She felt a strange change take place in her body, and a strange power flowed through her body. And when she uses this power, the world slows down before his eyes, and she is able to better capture the enemy's weaknesses and launch attacks from the enemy's weak defenses. This power. Marin came to her father's room, took down the shotgun hanging on the wall, and loaded the bullets one by one. I'll use it to smash the heads of those werewolves with my own hands. Time passed by, and night gradually fell, shrouding this remote town. A foul smell lingered in the air, and even in Marin's house, one could smell the killing intent and wild stench emanating from Paul's body. The moon hangs in the sky. The bright moonlight does not make people feel safe, but instead makes people feel that there is darkness surging under the moonlight. 3 skeleton warriors under Mark patrolled the yard to ensure that Paul could not sneak into the house quietly. Suddenly, when a skeleton warrior walked to a corner of the yard, the smell of wild beasts suddenly became several times stronger. 2 green lights lit up, a huge shadow climbed over the wall, and a low wolf howl sounded in the yard. Paul, who transformed into a werewolf, could not restrain the urge to kill in his heart, and stabbed towards the skeleton warrior with his sharp claws. The moment it landed, a red mark fell from the room and landed on Paul. A cold voice sounded, "The damage is getting worse." Mark's eyes were cold, and he turned over and jumped out of the window. In the process of landing, pale bones and teeth had already condensed in his hands. "Call out!" Mark waved his right hand, and a bone tooth broke through the air, stirred up strong wind, and flew towards Paul with a roar. After landing, Mark rolled smoothly. While he condensed the bone teeth in his left hand, he also transferred the momentum of the fall to the bone teeth. This bone tooth made a violent sound of breaking through the air. It was faster and more powerful than the previous one. The 2 bone teeth drew 2 arcs and stabbed Paul's body from the left and right sides at the same time. Paul's green pupils reflected 2 pale lights, and Bone Tooth was approaching it very quickly. Chapter 14. 2 bone teeth flew towards Paul from the left and right with a sharp sound of breaking through the air. At the same time, the skeleton warrior who was attacked by Paul also reacted very quickly. It jumped away in small steps, blocking forward diagonally with the bone shield held in its left hand, and fiercely swiping the bone sickle held in its right hand from the lower right to the upper left. The target of the attack happened to be Paul's chest and abdomen. Paul roared, twisted his body, and avoided the skeleton warrior's counterattack by a hair. When Paul's sharp claws hit the skeleton warrior's bone shield, and the huge force knocked the skeleton warrior back a few steps. The skeleton warrior jumped a few steps back to relieve his strength, and involuntarily moved away from Paul. But fortunately, due to the blockage of the bone shield, the skeleton warrior did not suffer much damage. At this moment, Bonya was spinning crazily, and its sharp edges were only a hair's breadth away from Paul's temples on the left and right sides. The sharply exposed Bonya made Paul feel a sense of crisis in his heart. Even if he is now in werewolf form, his head is still a weak point, not to mention suffering from the damage-increasing curse. If these 2 bone teeth really penetrated the skull, even the werewolf would die completely. There was a ferocious look in his eyes, and his green pupils almost shrank into a line. The muscles all over Paul's body tensed and relaxed in just an instant, releasing great power like a spring. Boom! He used all 4 limbs and rushed forward like a hungry wolf pouncing on food. His whole body flipped and jumped into the air, avoiding the 2 bone teeth that attacked him. At the moment of taking off, Paul let out a howl, turned his body, and flew 2 bone teeth almost grazing his forehead. Then his sharp claws suddenly stretched out and pinched 2 bone teeth, and violent power surged out of his arms. The 2 bone teeth that missed the target were caught by Paul and thrown back with great force. Only 2 white flashes were seen. A sense of crisis emerged in Mark's heart. He rolled on the spot and rolled out to the side in embarrassment. Plop, plop, the 2 bone teeth penetrated deeply into the ground, and the splashing mud hurt Mark's cheeks. Before he could get up, Paul had already turned over quickly, regained his balance before landing, landed on all 4s, and pounced again like a wolf. He was extremely fast, like a grey-black lightning, moving left and right, back and forth in the courtyard, avoiding Mark's sight, and then suddenly pounced from the side and behind. Paul opened his bloody mouth and bit Mark's fragile neck. Mark's thinking was also extremely fast. He didn't look back and opened his hands. He fired a bone tooth forward with his right hand, and a fierce force came from his hand. Under this force, Mark's body slid backward along the ground. Paul didn't expect Mark to be able to move even when he fell to the ground, and the position he had predicted was suddenly empty. But in his werewolf state, he is incredibly agile and his muscles are so strong that ordinary people cannot imagine. Still in midair, when Paul saw Mark ducking away, a whip-like tail suddenly swung, causing a loud roar in the air. With the force of this swing, his muscles tightened, and his whole body changed direction in the air, miraculously turning back and pounced towards Mark again. And when he turned back, his pupils immediately shrank to the extreme, and he turned his head away reflexively. Because Mark seemed to have anticipated his movements, he had already condensed another bone tooth in his left hand, and was well prepared to launch it diagonally upward, exactly where Paul's head would be after he changed his trajectory. Laugh. Paul's quick reflexes saved his life and allowed him to avoid the fatal bone tooth, but his neck was still sliced open by the bone tooth. He let out a roar of pain or anger, and fell crookedly to the ground. Mark also backed up a bit with the bone tooth he just fired, stood up, and started running sideways. Mark's eyes were extremely cold. The werewolf was too fast and more difficult than he imagined. The series of moves just now were like a rabbit rising and a falcon falling, and they all happened within a few seconds. If it weren't for his high mental attribute points and extremely fast brain reaction, he might have been jumped by Paul just now and turned into a ball of minced meat. He continued to shoot bone teeth from his hands, one after another, shooting forward in an irregular manner, covering Paul and blocking Paul's speed. The three skeleton warriors also moved forward under Mark's control. Two of the skeleton warriors suddenly threw the bone scythes in their hands at Paul. The two bone scythes kept rotating close to Paul, blocking Paul's dodge position in a large area. Coupled with the bone teeth launched by Mark, there are not many places left for Paul to avoid. Paul roared wildly, but had no choice but to fly out toward the only opening to avoid the incoming attacks. At this time, the third skeleton suddenly jumped up and hugged Paul. A fierce look flashed in Paul's eyes, and he could move with his powerful muscles even in mid-air. He forcefully waved his claws and struck the skeleton warrior. The powerful force and sharp claws immediately tore off most of the skeleton warrior's body. On Mark's system panel, the skeleton warrior's health bar suddenly dropped from full to only the last trace of blood. You must know that Mark's summoning skeleton skill level has reached level 3. The skeleton warrior's defense is much higher than at the beginning, but even so, he was almost killed by a single attack. If such a claw falls on Mark, there is no doubt that Mark will be killed instantly and there will be no chance of survival. But this is enough. At least this skeleton warrior still has the ability to move. It will not stop its movements because of pain or reduced blood bar, and is still executing Mark's instructions. It opened its arms made of white bones and hugged Paul's head like a lover. Paul's body sank, and he was knocked off balance by the skeleton warrior and fell to the ground. The other two skeleton warriors did not let go of this opportunity. They also rushed forward and pressed Paul tightly, destroying Paul's balance and preventing Paul from getting up. Mark got a chance to breathe, but he didn't let it go. He stopped at this time and used the tooth spell with all his strength. Bone teeth one after another gathered around Mark, penetrated forward, and penetrated Paul's body. Large clumps of blood spattered from Paul's body, and the stinking werewolf blood exuded a disgusting smell, staining the ground in the yard. Paul struggled desperately when he was attacked, constantly hitting the skeleton warrior pressing on him. When his ferocity was aroused, his power was frightening. After the skeleton warrior was hit several times, his health bars dropped like a waterfall, and the suppressive force became weaker and weaker. When Paul's whole body was penetrated by more than 10 bones and teeth, he finally destroyed all 3 of Mark's skeleton warriors, and then suddenly got up from the ground. Without the restraint of the skeleton warrior, even if he was seriously injured, he was sure that he could tear the boy who had caused him serious injuries to pieces in an instant. Roar! Paul roared, jumped into the air, and rushed towards Mark again. But at this moment, Mark whispered, "It's over." Behind Mark, Marin, who had been hiding all this time, shouted, "Look inside." A ray of light flashed in her eyes, and the whole world slowed down. The double-barreled shotgun in her hand was aimed at Mark in front of her, but she saw Paul through Mark's body. When Paul pounced ferociously, Marin pulled the trigger in her hand. "Monster, go to hell where you deserve to go." Boom! A huge roar sounded. The dense shrapnel penetrated Mark's body, but did not cause any harm to him. Instead, it all penetrated Paul's cursed body. Thump! The flames flickered away. Paul's body immediately fell to the ground. Chapter 15. Under the quiet moonlit night, a oozing body lay in the yard of Marin's house. Paul's body is gradually transforming from a werewolf state to a human state, but it still retains some werewolf characteristics, such as thick finger bones, protruding canine teeth, etc. The gunshot just now seemed to break the tranquility of the town. Many people's homes turned on lights, and they didn't know what was going on. If they see this body now, they may be in a lot of trouble. Mark frowned and asked, "Take the body and go to your machine shop. I have some things to do." Marin didn't talk nonsense. Facing the bloody corpse, she spat and whispered, "Damn werewolf, may you suffer the torment of fire in hell." Then Mark and him worked together, and after a lot of effort, they loaded Paul's body into the Marin family's car and drove towards the Marin family's machinery factory. The Marin family's machinery factory is far away from the town, and because all the workers in the machinery factory have been poached by the Kimmel family, there is no one inside, which makes Mark and the others' movements more convenient. "Are we going to destroy the corpses here?" Marin asked. She pointed to a furnace in the machinery factory. "This is a furnace for heat treatment. It can easily reach 900 degrees Celsius. Throw the body in, and when the furnace is turned on, it will turn into coke. Then throw it into the crusher." Even when Holmes came, he could find no trace of the body. "Do you want to do it now?" Mark glanced at Marin in surprise. His follower was more adaptable than he thought. But he still shook his head. "No, wait first, I need you to help me complete something. There should be a few werewolves in the Kimmel family. Counting the werewolf wizard who transformed them into werewolves, it is still difficult to deal with them with our current strength. There are some things on this werewolf corpse that I can use, which may increase our power." Marin also nodded when he heard this. "After killing Paul just now, the system panel prompted me to gain 500 experience points and I have reached level 2. Now I feel that my physical fitness and agility have improved a lot, and there is a warm current flowing through my whole body. If your strength can be increased, our hope of victory will increase a lot." She dragged the body up. "What do you need me to do?" Mark pointed to Paul's fingers and teeth and said, "I need his bones and some of his blood. The bones and blood of werewolves contain the power of the curse. This material can be used to make the staff used by the necromancer, which is mentioned in Mark's seal of the necromancy school. As a spellcaster, whether Mark has equipment or not has a great impact on Mark's combat power. If he has a staff, his casting speed can be increased, and the skill increase that the staff may have attached will also increase his strength considerably. Help, take out the parts of his bones that are the most severely transformed into a werewolf. The claws and teeth are of the highest quality. Get some more blood out." Marin worked very simply. She moved Paul's body to the position of the sawing machine in the machine shop. This kind of saw machine is hydraulically driven and is generally used for metal cutting. It means directly sawing large pieces of steel into small sections, and then sending them for finishing to be processed into various parts produced by machinery factories. Once this kind of sawing machine is started, even steel can be cut easily, let alone the corpse of a mere werewolf. Even if a dragon's body is placed on the sawing machine, it may not be able to withstand the high-speed running saw blade. Marin turned on the safety of the sawing machine and pressed the switch. The saw blade of the sawing machine immediately began to rotate at high speed, making a buzzing sound. Marin turned the rocker, the sawing machine's workbench also moved slowly, and the saw blade moved forward. Laugh. With a muffled sound, an arm of the werewolf's corpse was cut off. This arm still maintains the werewolf state, with thick bones and sharp claws, which makes people's hair stand on end. Then, Marin used a large tool hammer to knock out all the teeth in the corpse, and found 2 protruding canine teeth in a mass of blood. Coupled with the werewolf blood collected in the bucket next to it, Mark has gathered all the materials he needs. What's next? Marin wiped it with a towel nonchalantly, wiping off all the blood that was spattered on her face and arms. Mark also admired Marin a little at this time. Although she is still a young girl, her courage is really admirable. Mark found a pencil and drew a shape on the paper. Next, process the werewolf bones like this. To make a staff, you first have to cut the material into a suitable shape. How's your skill with a milling machine? We only have 1 copy of the werewolf bone. If it's used up, we'll be gone. Marin smiled faintly. My family runs a machinery factory. I have been helping in the factory since I was a child. I can use milling machines and other things with my eyes closed. The shape of this staff is quite regular. I can mill it out for you in 30 minutes. After saying that, Marin took the materials she just obtained and processed them. The first step is to cut a knife at the end of the material and cut off a thin slice to see the cross-section of the material. Marin looked at it for a while and then started the milling machine. First, use the large cutter head to mill the entire material several times. Under Marin's control, the milling machine, which was originally difficult to control, was like an arm. After the first cut, Mark knew that Marin was definitely a master in this field and was not comparable to him. When I was a metalworking intern, I tried my best to make a hammer. If it were Marin, I would be able to finish what I did in a day in 20 minutes, but the quality is even worse. Next, Marin used several different types of blades in rotation. Layers of bone chips flew on the milling machine. The werewolf bones were also rapidly transforming into the shape of the staff inherited from the necromancy school. When Mark took this roughly processed staff to ask Tagio in the Mark of the Dead, Tagio was a little surprised. The material of this staff is inferior, but the processing method is so precise that it's shocking. It's hard to imagine that this was something made by you, an apprentice and a follower who had never even entered the door. If we could make such beautiful straight lines and circles so quickly, the power of all magic items would have been increased by at least 20 to 30%. After praising it, he said to Mark, the prototype of this staff is already perfect. Even the surface is very smooth and does not require further polishing. But the next step is to engrave the pathways on the staff. This is the most important part. Only if everything is inscribed correctly can your magic power flow smoothly and be released in the staff. During this process, as long as the hand shakes a little, the engraved pattern is likely to be lost. Are you sure you can succeed the first time? Mark smiled and looked at the other equipment displayed in the machinery factory. Marin's machine shop is quite good. It has all kinds of equipment, and they are all semi-automated. I don't know how accurate it is compared to the human hand. With these machines and the old master Marin, Tagio's worries were no longer a problem at all. When Mark and Marin entered the trajectory coordinates into the machine tool according to the inheritance of the necromancy school, the machine tool's cutter head started to follow the trajectory on its own without anyone adjusting it. Accurate, smooth, perfect. What is the most perfect pattern in the inheritance of the necromancy school? Then what is the pattern engraved on the staff? The werewolf's blood acts as the coolant for the machine tool, spraying on the staff along with the blade, and continuously seeps into the staff, causing the staff to gradually take on a strange scarlet color, as if it is alive. Tagio looked at this scene in shock in the Necronomicon seal. Mortals in this world are really terrifying. Perhaps the combination of the necromancy school and their so-called science can be promoted to a new level. Soon, the operation of the machine tool stopped. A blue light lit up in Mark's field of vision. Werewolf bone staff, blue, required level 4. The casting speed is increased by 10%, the tooth skill level is +1, and the damage amplification skill level is +1. Mark took a deep breath, feeling a sense of surprise in his heart. He really didn't expect that he would get such a staff of excellent quality. The item levels of Diablo 2 from low to high are white, blue, gold, dark gold, and green sets. Blue quality equipment is already a good equipment that can be obtained in the early stage, and some blue quality equipment can also surprise people. Properties appear. After all, in the memory of the inheritance of the necromancy school, the materials Mark just obtained can make a white quality staff. It is a fluke to slightly increase the casting speed. But he didn't expect that the quality of this staff now reached blue, and it also came with an increase in his 2 skills. After holding the staff, a feeling of fusion of blood emerged, as if the staff had become an extension of his body, and the feeling of mana pouring into it was smooth. At this time, Mark's skill panel also changed. Teeth, summons sharp bone teeth to attack your enemies, skill level 2. Number of bone teeth is 2, damage 2-3. As the tooth skill level increases, the number of bone teeth summoned each time a spell is released has doubled, and the damage of each bone tooth has also increased significantly. For Mark, this is definitely a sudden change in strength. The skill level of the damage amplifying curse has also been raised by 1 level, and its range and duration have increased a lot, avoiding the embarrassment of Mark having to spend mana to replenish the curse in the middle of the battle. In addition to the increase in spell casting speed brought by this staff, it can be said that just one staff has increased Mark's strength by as much as 50%. Marin asked, "What should we do next?" Mark looked at the sky. The moon was about to set, and the night was now at its darkest. It's a murderous night with a dark moon and high wind. Paul was killed by us. Once the Kimmel family finds out, they will definitely not let us go. Let's just keep doing nothing. Let's take the initiative and kill those werewolves first. Chapter 16. Take the initiative to kill that group of werewolves. A cold light flashed in Marin's eyes. She didn't say much, she just loaded the bullet into the shotgun silently, and then put the shotgun on her back. Mark also grabbed the staff, holding the blood-red staff in his hand and sending back a cool airflow. Let's go then. In the darkest hour before dawn, the two got in the car, crossed the edge of the town, and drove towards the town where the Kimmel family lived. The two of them didn't talk much along the way, they just chatted here and there to relieve the tension before the battle. Only when passing by a public cemetery, Mark asked Marin to stop the car. The 3 skeleton warriors he summoned before were destroyed by Paul. If he wanted to destroy the Kimmel family, it would be too dangerous without the restraint of the skeleton warriors. I want to summon skeletons again. Do you know who owns this cemetery? Mark asked. After all, the purpose of summoning skeletons is to destroy the corpse. Although after traveling through time, Mark's moral standards dropped again and again in order to survive. But at least if you destroy someone else's body and the trouble is settled later, you should compensate whatever you can. Marin jumped out of the car chewing gum and walked around with a flashlight. This is the public cemetery in the next town over. She pointed to an area, spit out the gum, and stuck it to a tombstone, nonchalantly. You can use these pieces as you like. They are the cemetery of the ancestors of the Kimmel family. Just treat it as waste and save yourself the psychological burden. Mark shrugged his shoulders, feeling no burden at all. He even saved the compensation for subsequent preparations. At most, their descendants will be sent in later, so that the ancestors of the Kimmel family will not be so lonely. Summon the skeleton. His mana poured into the staff, then quickly took shape and was released towards the cemetery. Click, click. There were sounds of collisions. Soon, one arm after another penetrated the ground, and 3 skeleton warriors dug up the soil from the ground and climbed up. Holding a bone shield in one hand and a bone sickle in the other, they sat neatly in the back row of the vehicle, just like the bodyguards of Mark and Marin. As Marin stepped on the accelerator, the strange car drove into the darkness again and drove towards the town not far away. 20 minutes later, Marin parked the vehicle outside the town. The Kimmel family's house is in the woods not far away. It is a spacious old house where all members of the Kimmel family live. Marin got out of the car, took off the shotgun she was carrying with her backhand, loaded it with a click, and then looked at Mark. So are we going to take advantage of the night to go in, or what? Mark shook his head. Don't worry. Werewolves have very good night vision and very sharp senses. If you just rush in, you are asking for trouble. The 3 skeleton warriors also got out of the car and moved a spare barrel of gasoline from the trunk. Mark's eyes were deep. If we can't deal with them in the dark, then drag them into the same situation as us, and then use our advantages to defeat them. The transformation into a werewolf not only brings a powerful body and bloodthirsty instincts, but the fear of fire is also amplified. Let's make a dish tonight, charcoal-grilled werewolf. After saying that, the skeleton warrior walked into a nearby gas station. When the only staff member at the gas station was dozing off, the skeleton warrior raised his bone shield and patched his head again, causing him to pass out. Then he began to carry barrels of gasoline to Mark and Marin. Marin glanced at the oil drums piled in front of her, smelled the smell of gasoline in the air, and whistled, "Cool, I like watching fireworks, especially while eating barbecue." She picked up 2 barrels of gasoline, and after crossing a certain distance, she saw the old house of the Kimmel family. Goodoo, goodoo. Marin poured gasoline into the Kimmel family's yard, and the brown liquid flowed on the lawn. The skeleton warriors also took the trouble to carry the gasoline barrels again and again, pouring gasoline on the Kimmel family's house and walls. It didn't take long before the Kimmel family's house was surrounded by gasoline, and the air was filled with a pungent smell of gasoline. The patriarch of the Kimmel family was the first to wake up from his sleep. His nose moved, and he almost choked on the pungent smell of gasoline, and there was a burst of anger in his heart. Who is it? Roar. He let out a roar, and his old body continued to expand, grey-white hair grew on his body, and his eyes turned dark green, flashing with a heart-stopping vicious murderous intention. Click. George Kimmel, the patriarch of the Kimmel family, didn't even think about saving his other descendants. He crashed through the room and jumped out of the yard with the power of a werewolf. While he was still in the air, he saw several figures outside. Among them, Marin's appearance was clearly visible to him, and a sense of resentment immediately appeared on George's face. If I hadn't been worried about the police, I should have given you, like your parents, to the adults to cut into pieces. Marin's eyes were cold, and she directly activated the inner vision skill, aiming the muzzle of the shotgun at George. There was also a hint of murderous intent in Mark's eyes. He held the staff and activated the tooth spell twice in less than half a second. 4 bone teeth flew out like sharp arrows from a string, blocking George's path of whereabouts. The moment Mark took out the staff, George's eyes fell on it, and a violent murderous intention surged from his heart. He sensed that this was the bone of his eldest son. You killed Paul. I'm going to tear you apart. Boom. The muscles on George's body were tangled, and he took control of his falling body. He flicked his tail hard and swept it in a semicircle, sweeping away the bones and teeth flying from the left and right. Then it opened its huge mouth, opened and closed its white fangs, and bitten a bone tooth shot from the front. Click! The bone teeth were clamped by George's powerful bite force, and the sharp force bombarded George's body, causing George's head to tilt back, and his whole body stagnated in the air for a moment. Seizing this opportunity, George showed a fierce look in his eyes, flicked his head, and the bone tooth it bitten flew out, knocking off the last bone tooth. The continuous collisions allowed George to adjust his posture with the help of strength, and he was ready to leap. Its 4 limbs have accumulated strength like a spring. As long as it touches a wall or a tree trunk, and there is a slight place to step on, it can pour out its power in an instant. Jump back from the wall and tear the boy who killed Paul into pieces. Mark snorted coldly. George's degree of werewolf transformation seemed to be much higher than Paul's. Even though his body is old, his burst of strength can still overwhelm Paul. But why did George fight back, intentionally or unintentionally? He shouted lowly, the damage is getting worse. A red mark appeared out of thin air and enveloped George's body, making him suddenly stiff and feeling extremely dangerous. At the same time, Marin also assumed a standard shooting posture and suddenly pulled the trigger. Boom! George roared wildly and reluctantly turned his body, but several red shrapnel still penetrated his body, splattering large amounts of dirty blood. George's body lost strength, fell from the air, and landed in the yard, his body covered with pungent gasoline. It was at this time that members of the Kimmel family finally ran out in panic. Marin snorted, "Go to hell, monsters!" Click! Boom! The second shot fired, hitting the gasoline-soaked ground. George's eyes were splitting. No! In an instant, his screams were drowned out by blazing fire and violent explosions. Under the influence of gasoline, the entire Kimmel family's house began to burn, and the raging fire covered all the members of the Kimmel family. The smell of burning came from the fire. Mark, Marin, and 3 skeleton warriors stood outside the Kimmel family, carefully observing the situation at the fire scene. Behind the house, a werewolf whose whole body was almost burned passed through the flames and ran frantically towards the seaside. Marin's eyes were filled with murderous intent. It's George, he's still alive. Mark's eyes moved, he went to find the guy who transformed him into a werewolf. They looked at each other with murderous intent in their eyes. The moon has set, the world has dawned, and the werewolf's power will be weakened. If they don't take this opportunity to eliminate the root cause, they may have to face the hidden revenge of a werewolf wizard. Mark and the others quickly followed the traces left by George. George also felt that Mark and the others were following him. At this time, he was able to act entirely out of his will for revenge. His bloody eyes could barely see clearly, but the malicious light radiating from them was truly shocking. My lord will tear you to pieces. Chapter 17. Hearing George's resentful voice, Marin sneered, and the shotgun in her hand burst into flames in motion. Boom! Several pieces of hot shrapnel sank into George's body, causing his mouth to spurt out large amounts of blood again. Mark sat on the shoulders of a skeleton warrior, looking coldly at George who was running away in front of him. If you say another nonsense, I guarantee you won't even have a chance to find your master. Do you want to become a skeleton like your ancestors? Then you can say a few more words. He stretched out his palm, and several pale bone teeth rotated above his palm, and the sharp tips were aimed at George. Puppy, run faster! Call out! Call out! Bonya made a sharp sound of breaking through the air and shot towards George's back heart. George felt a chill in his heart and growled bitterly. He unleashed the potential in his body, which was about to run out of fuel. He increased his speed and ran towards the sea cliff against the dawn of the sky. After nearly 20 minutes of escaping, George finally arrived at the beach and walked through the rugged sea cliffs. He was breathing heavily, and a ray of sunshine appeared on the horizon. Under the sunlight, the werewolf's blood will be suppressed, and George's werewolf transformation quickly fades, returning to the appearance of an old man. He staggered towards a cave, his consciousness was blurred, and he only wanted to find his master so as to save his life. And just when he reached the entrance of the cave, boom! A violent gunshot rang out, and the bullet blew out George's head, causing his body to fall to the ground with a thud. With a click, Marin pulled the bolt of the gun and followed Mark to the entrance of the cave. Marin kicked George's body aside and made way for the entrance to the cave. The cave is deep and dark, and the terrain seems extremely complex. The sea cliffs here are eroded by sea water. The situation inside the cave will be very complicated, and roads extend in all directions. Are we going in? Marin looked at Mark. Mark raised his left hand and rolled up his sleeve, revealing the black devil mark printed on his left hand. The skeleton warrior dragged George's body over, took off George's clothes, and exposed George's bloody chest. Mark didn't care about the disgusting blood. He leaned forward with his left hand and pressed it on George's chest. When he picked it up with his left hand, a dark mark pattern made of blood was already imprinted on George's chest. Mark narrowed his eyes slightly. If the guy who transformed the Kimmel family into werewolves really escaped from the magical world, then he must be Voldemort's subordinate. He must be familiar with the dark mark. He waved his hand, and a skeleton warrior dragged George's body into the depths of the cave, placed the body here, and then turned around and came out. In a dark cave, two green and violent lights suddenly lit up. Fenrir Greyback, Voldemort's most vicious werewolf, fled to this remote country to avoid being judged by the Ministry of Magic. Now is the most tense time for horror hunting. Every few days, you can hear the news that Death Eaters have been caught approaching Azkaban. Fenrir is hiding in the cave and dare not go out or use magic spells. Afraid of being discovered by the Aurors from the Ministry of Magic. He relies almost entirely on the Kimmel family for food, and occasionally hunts wild deer and other animals in the forest at night. Just now, when George came to the entrance of the cave, Fenrir woke up from his deep sleep. Fenrir felt a sense of danger after the gunfire sounded. He thought the gunshots he heard should be some kind of powerful spell, or maybe the Aurors were coming. Next, when the skeleton warrior controlled by Mark dragged George's body into the cave, Fenrir could hardly hold back and wanted to take action. Fortunately, he discovered the anomaly in time and lurked in the passages extending in all directions at the bottom of the cave. That thing just now didn't smell alive at all. Fenrir said to himself, on the contrary, it has an aura of decay and death. It is not the magic used by Aurors, but rather like the inferi created by black magic. After the skeleton warrior left, Fenrir came out of the passage and looked at George's body cautiously. The head was smashed by some powerful attack. Is this a demonstration against me? Fenrir showed his fangs, a fierce look appeared on his face, and then suddenly froze when he saw the chest part of George's corpse. A pattern of skulls and snakes printed in blood was left on George's chest. This pattern was extremely familiar to Fenrir. Mark of the Dark Demon. This is a mark that only the most hardcore Death Eaters are given. Before Voldemort fell, the Dark Mark was a symbol of power and status among the Death Eaters. Each Dark Mark must have made outstanding contributions to be awarded. Fenrir himself did not have the Mark of the Dark Devil. When he saw the Mark of the Dark Devil, he felt both excitement and fear in his heart. He didn't know which core Death Eaters were out there. This Death Eater found him and even revealed the Dark Mark. What was the purpose of this? Was he recruited by the Ministry of Magic to hunt him down? Or is it that the Dark Lord has resurrected and wants to recruit the Death Eaters again? With such a mood, Fenrir was extremely confused. At this time, Mark came to the entrance of the cave and said inside, I am the son of death, the descendant of the Dark Lord. I am born with the power to control corpses and death. I am destined to become the next Dark Lord. If you were a Death Eater, you would have heard my name. Fenrir was startled by this information. He seemed to have heard such rumors, and it was told to him by a dying Death Eater. Fenrir still remembered the Death Eater's wild eyes. This is an ancient prophecy, Dumbledore believed in it, and it has been confirmed. A boy who lived will defeat the Dark Lord and end the Death Eater's reign. And the Dark Lord also left a prophecy before he died. A 6-year-old boy has the magic power of death. He is destined to become the leader of the Death Eaters and the next Dark Lord. Fenrir, when you see the Son of Death, the Death Eaters will rise again. The fanatical tone was really clear when he recalled it, and Fenrir was deeply impressed by the language of the Son of Death. Two thoughts arose in Fenrir's mind at the same time. Capture the Son of Death and hand it over to the Ministry of Magic. Perhaps the Ministry of Magic will pardon his sins and he will not be thrown into Azkaban. Or is it just as the Death Eater firmly believed, protecting the Son of Death and waiting for him to lead the Death Eaters to rise again and rule the magical world again? When Fenrir's eyes hesitated, Mark said again, "Since you already know my name, you should also tell me your name." Fenrir hesitated for a while, then responded to Mark's question, "Fenrir Greyback." Mark's eyes moved and he thought, it is indeed him, the most notorious werewolf. He calmed down, recalled the information about Fenrir he knew from the original work, and said calmly, "Fenrir Greyback, I know you. You once led the werewolves under my father. You successfully used violence and intimidation to make the Death Eaters feared by the wizarding world, and you also made the traitors who tipped off the news get their due punishment many times. You are a very capable wizard. I have heard my father praise you many times. He also told me that when you make another contribution, he will fight against all opinions and give you the honor of bearing the mark of the Dark Devil." Mark's words made Fenrir a little dizzy. The Son of Death is the Dark Lord's illegitimate son? Well, this is very possible. Isn't it normal for the Dark Lord to leave heirs? He was so powerful, handsome, and insightful that countless witches among the Death Eaters wanted to become the Dark Lord's woman. The Dark Lord also discussed himself with his son in private and even praised himself? If this had not been discussed, how old was the Death Child now, and how could he know what he had done for the Death Eaters? So, has the Dark Lord really thought about giving himself a dark mark? For a moment, Fenrir felt flattered. He had never had such extravagant expectations. Mark continued, "Fenrir, I know you are hesitant now, hesitating whether to capture me and hand me over to the Ministry of Magic in exchange for a reduced sentence for yourself." Fenrir was shocked. He really thought so just now, and he was almost ready to take action. But Mark's next words gave Fenrir a chill in his heart. "If that's what you think, you're stupid. You have bitten so many children. It is impossible for the magic world to tolerate you. There are still a few children of nobles among them. Now that they are back in power and without the protection of their father, do you really expect that you can escape? Tribulation. Even if you escape and leave alive, so what? You will have your teeth and claws pulled out, put on a dog training mask, and be tied up in a dark cell so that you can no longer continue to spread the werewolf's blood. Oh, you had such a vicious reputation back then that everyone who saw you would be afraid of you. After you hand me over to the Ministry of Magic, you will be imprisoned and guarded for the rest of your life. A jailer can stop you from wanting to live or die." There was sarcasm in Mark's voice. "Fenrir Greyback, leader of the werewolves, can you really accept such a gap?" Fenrir listened to Mark's words. Although he knew that Mark was deceiving him, he still had to admit that what Mark said was the most likely thing to happen. Roar. He let out a low roar. If that was the case, it would be better to kill him. "What should I do?" Fenrir's eyes flashed with green light, and he slowly walked towards the outside of the cave. "Son of Death, for the sake of being a Death Eater, please give me some inspiration." Mark's voice was very calm. "Father's return will take time, and while my father is dormant, I, the Dark Lord's heir and the Son of Death, will lead the Death Eaters. Come out, Greyback, and join me. I escaped from the hands of the Ministry of Magic after going through many obstacles. You are the first Death Eater I found, and you will become a subordinate I rely on. When my father returns, I will ask him to give you the Mark of the Dark. And granting you a seat at the Ministry of Magic is my Son of Death's promise. And these rewards require you to make the right choice today. Become my enemy, or submit to me." Hearing this, Fenrir was shocked and swallowed. His tone was greedy, but there was a vigilant light in his eyes. "A seat at the Ministry of Magic. What if I want to be the Minister of Magic?" He is probing. If what Mark said was just to give him a favor, even the Minister of Magic's promise, it would be enough to prove that Mark had no intention of fulfilling his promise. Or maybe this child of death is just a child who doesn't even understand things, and is not worth following at all. After Fenrir asked, Mark smiled and shook his head. "Impossible." The atmosphere suddenly became tense. Mark continued to mind his own business and said, "Fenrir, you also understand that the position of the Minister of Magic affects many interests, and it is impossible for you to get it. But I can guarantee that there will never be any problem with the Special Operations Division being led by you. Hunting, I guess this kind of work is more comfortable for you than sitting in an office processing documents." Only then did the suspicion in Fenrir's eyes dissipate, and he slowly walked out of the cave. In the rising sunshine on the beach, he saw a boy holding a staff in his right hand and the mark of the dark devil on his left hand. Under the sun, 3 skeletons surround the boy as his attendants, making him look like a young king. Now, the boy cast his eyes down and looked at Fenrir, who was slowly walking out of the cave. This made Fenrir inexplicably excited. This might be a good opportunity for him to make a career. He followed the example of the wizard nobles and bowed his body. "My lord, the son of death, the son of the Dark Lord, Fenrir Greyback will follow you to the end of his life." Mark smiled. "That's great, Fenrir." Before he finished speaking, before Fenrir could raise his head, a red mark fell on Fenrir's body. Then there were 2 sharp bone teeth, which roared to tear the air and penetrated Fenrir's arm. Under the damage-increasing curse, Fenrir felt a chill, and his proud defense seemed like paper. 2 bone teeth penetrated Fenrir's arm, and they severed Fenrir's arm muscles. Severe pain spread, and Fenrir's hand involuntarily loosened, and the wand held in his right hand fell to the ground. "No! You lied to me!" Fenrir roared furiously and suddenly began to transform into a werewolf. But Maren fired a shot at this time. There was a cold light flashing in her eyes, and she had already activated her inner vision skill, and saw the weak points in Fenrir's defense. Boom! Fiery fire erupted, and even the werewolf's skin couldn't resist the flying bullets, let alone the damage that deepened the curse. Fenrir's body immediately burst into a cloud of blood mist, and the process of transforming into a werewolf was immediately interrupted. Blood poured out of his wounds like a fountain. He staggered back, blood spurting out of his mouth, and his eyes were full of unwillingness. Click! Maren pulled the bolt and fired again. After this shot, no matter how strong Fenrir's physique was, he could not stand again, but half knelt on the ground. Mark waved his wand gently. Dozens of bones and teeth appeared one after another around him. "Call out! Call out! Call out!" These flew towards Fenrir like a violent storm. They penetrated Fenrir's muscles and organs, like steel cones, pinning Fenrir to the ground, and he couldn't even move a finger. Bang bang, bang bang, every time Fenrir's heart beats, blood spurts out from all over his body, dyeing the nearby rocks red. There was remorse in his eyes, but all the muscles in his hands and feet were severed, and his body was bleeding continuously. He was not reconciled. With his speed and strength after transforming into a werewolf, coupled with his terrifying resistance to magic, his combat prowess is at the forefront even among the Death Eaters. But now he was turned into this by a young child and a muggle. Appearance. If he hadn't been deceived by the Son of Death, how could he have ended up like this? Maren slowly walked forward, and a skeleton warrior handed over the bone sickle. A cold light flashed in her eyes. "Did you kill my parents?" Fenrir laughed wildly. "Ah, I can smell it, little girl, you smell so much like your parents' blood." "Ha ha ha, I was so hungry at that time that I didn't even let go of the fish in the sea. When the Kimmel family sent your parents over, I was so happy. One bite after another, I tore open their flesh and took out their internal organs, letting them feel alive what it felt like to be disemboweled and eaten. That kind of flesh and blood full of despair and fear is so wonderful, ha ha ha, I still remember the pleasure after filling my stomach with them." Crazy murderous intent burst out from Maren's eyes. She held the bone sickle tightly, turned her waist, and waved a pale arc of light with a low roar. Click! Fenrir's wild laughter ended immediately, and half of the bone sickle got stuck in his neck, making him unable to speak. Maren silently pulled out the bone sickle, and then waved it again. Click! Click! Blood splattered. Not long after, a werewolf head rolled onto the ground. Mark came over and gently patted Maren on the back. "Don't worry, even his body will never rest in peace. I will make his bones into a staff, his blood into poison, his soul and head into an embalmed head, and he will be tortured forever." Looking at the rising sun on the sea, Mark exhaled a breath and rubbed his temples, which were aching from fatigue. "It's over, let's go back first." He lifted Fenrir's head, and a malicious look could still be seen in the eyes of the head. Mark said calmly, "Your escape is over. And I will continue on your bones. I will continue to live, and I will live better than anyone else." Chapter 18. What shall we do next? After cutting off Fenrir's head with her own hands, Maren seemed a little confused and didn't know what to do in the future. The Kimmel family has been wiped out, and his parents' revenge has been avenged. He suddenly has no goal, and his whole body feels empty. Will you continue to run the machinery factory left behind by your family? Then it is necessary to invite back the workers who had previously defected to the Kimmel family. To be honest, although Marin knew that it was not their fault, after all, they all had to eat, but from the bottom of her heart, Marin was very resistant to the idea of inviting them back. And after coming into contact with the mysterious power, Marin became more curious about the world. Like her peers, she has a strong curiosity for stories about magic and monsters. After learning from Mark that there was a magical world in this world, she became yearning for the magical world and wanted to see what the wizard's world was like. Therefore, Marin looked at Mark and showed a rare expression of excitement. Are we going to travel around to solve those supernatural events and become famous demon hunters? I know a few legends, such as Count Dracula in Romania, the Snow Mountain Savage in the Snow Mountains, and the Loch Ness Monster. Mark rubbed his aching temples. I think werewolves are already difficult to deal with. As a child, I still prefer a stable and prosperous life. After all, I also need time to accumulate my knowledge in order to take a further step on the path of the necromancer. Marin shrugged. Well, that's not bad. You are the boss, you have the final say. She moved her aching body. I also think that this kind of adventure is enough once. Now I just want to go back and have a good sleep. The two of them returned to the town that was noisy due to the sound of shootings. They had no energy to care about the rumors about the howling of wolves, so they both laid their heads down and had a good sleep. As soon as he woke up, Mark pulled Marin into the living room. His mind is very clear now and he has some plans for the route he will take next. Whether it is in real society or in the magical world, money is the most indispensable thing. Our equipment is very rudimentary. If we want to make more magic instruments, we will need a lot of money to buy materials. I guess we don't have much money at our disposal right now. Then I have to study the knowledge of the necromancer. I don't want to be like in the movie, where some neighbor kid accidentally discovers the secret of the necromancer. I need an absolutely safe research institute that can give me peace of mind. Improve strength. In the same way, we also need a certain social status to avoid being disturbed by all kinds of messy things. Some rare materials may also require a certain social status to obtain. Mark knocked on the table. So our top priority is to make money. Marin sighed. Then I will find those workers and let the machinery factory restart. In this case, there should be no problem in funding your research. Mark shook his head. No, I don't want untrustworthy people to come close to our lives. That would easily expose our secrets. The machinery factory has a very good basic base. It has a verifiable history and all legal authorizations. Moreover, it is completely owned by you and no one can interfere. It's awesome, just awesome. Marin, you should no longer run it with your previous business thinking. Now that you have entered a new world, we have many more resources available to us than you did before. Miss Marin, we must give full play to our advantages and use the least energy to earn the most wealth and status. Mark found a blackboard and wrote a large line of words on it. The basis for winning wealth is competitiveness, and magical creations have unique advantages in the real world. His tone rose slightly. The magic world, Marin, the magic world is our greatest wealth. Do you know what kind of madness America's gold caused in Europe when the New World was discovered? Although the current magical world has a long history, it is extremely closed. No wizard has thought of the wealth that can be created by applying the knowledge of the magical world to the real world. A bottle of medicine that can instantly scab large wounds will become one of the most profitable drugs in the world if it is patented in the real world. A camera that can take moving pictures can sweep all camera manufacturers. Who knows if a piece of metal made from an alchemical formula can solve a certain technical problem in reality? Zovi, Muggles don't know the existence of the magical world, and wizards have never thought of using their knowledge to gain benefits in the real world. We will be the pioneers. Following Mark's words, Marin's eyes also lit up. Are we going to create a world-leading company, like Ibtal, Crowsoft? Oh my god, this is crazy. Mark nodded. This is certain, because what we will bring is knowledge accumulated for thousands of years from another world, and it is a completely different system. With this, any wealth and status we need will be at our fingertips. He looked at Marin, the desire in his eyes undisguised. I don't want to live that kind of wandering life anymore, especially I don't want anyone to control my destiny anymore. Whether it's Voldemort, Dumbledore, the Ministry of Magic, the Wizarding World, or those countries in reality, I don't want to be controlled by any force anymore. He pointed in the direction of Marin's machinery factory and said, this machinery factory will become our most solid foundation. We will make this machinery factory bigger and better, turn it into a company, open branches all over the world, become a monopoly giant, and even build an independent country based on it. Now, we first need to find someone who can open the door to the magical world for us." Marin asked, "What is this person's name and where does he live?" Mark said calmly, "Number 19, Spider End Alley, his name is Severus Snape." Mark held the staff with a playful look on his face. This is a man who will do anything for the one he loves. He can protect the person he hates most for the sake of his lover, and he will have the courage to risk everything to resurrect his lover. This is the end of 1981. The darkest years in the wizarding world have just ended. In this winter, people can finally relax and spend time with their families without worrying about hooded guys breaking into their homes and casting deadly spells. Yet Severus Snape seemed like a zombie. He locked himself in his home at number 19 Spider End, without seeing anyone, and was heartbroken over Lily's death. Apart from going to the Wizengamot for trial and defense, Snape had barely stepped out of his house and didn't care about anything. But on this day, in the dark Spider End Alley, Snape's door was knocked for the first time. Boom boom, boom boom. The sound rang twice, and Snape came to the door with a cold expression. Is it someone from the Wizengamot again? Snape thought to himself. And when he opened the door, there was no one outside, except for an anonymous letter lying quietly at the door. Snape carefully opened the letter, but was confused by the line on it. Resurrection from the dead is not an illusion. Since the magic stone can make people immortal, there will naturally be more powerful things that can bring people back to life. Mr. Severus Snape, do you want to know how to return from the dead? Do you want to truly resurrect Lily? We'll give you a hint, the resurrection stone is not fake, it's real. As for its current whereabouts, if you want to know, please Mr. Snape mail the books I need to the following address. Looking forward to your reply, you can call me Mr. Chapter 19. Looking at the anonymous letter in front of him, Snape quickly recovered from his state of shock. His brows furrowed deeply. Snape did love Lily very much, but he was not the kind of guy who lost his mind because of love. On the contrary, Snape had a calm mind and an unbreakable will. In the original book, for Lily, he was able to work as an undercover agent for Voldemort, and was not discovered by Voldemort until the end. You must know that Voldemort has the ability to easily read other people's preferences since he was a child. After learning magic, Voldemort has almost reached the top level in the magical world in the legilimency spell. No one can lie in front of Voldemort, he can easily see into the thinking of almost all wizards. But Snape was able to successfully stay undercover next to Voldemort. How could such a person be so upset over an anonymous letter? Whose trick is it and what is its purpose? Snape grabbed his wand, alert to the dangers that might be lurking in the shadows. At this time, a strange movement came from the eaves, a clicking sound. Snape suddenly turned around, pointed his wand upward, and then his pupils suddenly shrank. In the white snow, an owl made of white bones stayed on the eaves of his roof, staring directly at Snape with its dark eyes. Is this transformation magic or? Snape was confused. At this moment, the bone owl tilted its head, then flapped its bone wings and slowly flew down from the eaves, landing not far in front of Snape. It used its claws to write a line of crooked words on the snow, if bones can move, why can't the dead come back? Then under Snape's gaze, the bone owl bowed to him like a human being, and added his signature, Mr. After doing this, the bone owl suddenly shattered and turned into lifeless bones one after another. Snape staggered back 2 steps, unable to believe what he saw and heard. This wasn't some kind of transfiguration mixed with deception, Snape could confirm that. Without saying a word, he hurriedly cleared away the pile of bones on the ground, and then returned to the room holding the anonymous letter. By any means, please get me a book on dark magic and transfiguration, I think there will be a lot of them in the restricted section at Hogwarts. Do not attract attention. Please print it and spread it into single pages, and send it in a tome on alchemy such as the complete alchemical formula. The reason why I chose the alchemical formula book is because alchemy there are many strange rituals in itself. If someone discovers it, some trouble may be avoided. I hope you can understand. Please send the package to 1106 Lading Road, Cornwalton. Thank you. Snape frowned. Dark magic transformation, is there a dark wizard behind this? He wrote down all the information in the anonymous letter, then threw it into the brazier and burned it, then turned and walked outside. It is not convenient for Snape to enter Hogwarts now, but although books about dark magic transformation are rare, it is not difficult to obtain at this time. Some pure-blood families who were Death Eaters were struggling with these books. Snape himself was a close friend of the Malfoy family, so he thought it would be a good idea to help him get rid of some of the dark magic books. 2 days later, an owl flew out of Snape's hand. It was carrying a large package that looked a bit heavy. It contains the things mentioned in the anonymous letter. Snape took apart a book on dark magic and transfiguration, sandwiched it in a copy of the most complete alchemy recipe in ancient and modern times, and sent it to the address mentioned in the letter. But he also did some tricks. A page from the dark magic transformation book was made into a door key by him. Snape could use the porte-clés to quickly go to where the page was and see who was behind it. He also did some tricks on the owl's body so that he could see the situation near the owl through magic. "Let me see what you're going to do." Snape's cold eyes followed the owl and looked toward the distant sky. Number 1106 Lading Road, Cornwalton County, is an ancient house that has been abandoned for a long time. Legend has it that this place is haunted, so nearby residents don't even dare to go near it. But on this day, an owl flew straight into this eerie old house. Snape connected with the owl's vision and felt that the surrounding scene suddenly darkened. "This is that guy's lair." Snape clenched his wand, ready to use the porte-clés to go here and reveal the true face of the mastermind behind the scenes. But then no living person appeared, only the sound of clicking. The owl let out a hoot of fear, and an arm made of bone stretched out from the darkness and removed the package the owl was carrying. Snape stared at the existence in the darkness. It was a skeleton, a human-shaped skeleton. Now this lifeless thing is unwrapping the package and taking out the alchemy book inside with the same movements as ordinary people. Where is the mastermind behind the scenes? This thing must be handed over to the mastermind behind the scenes, right? Snape waited patiently while the owl flew to the branches outside, monitoring every move of the skeletons in the ancient house. The skeleton flipped through the book page by page, taking out the dark magic pages mixed in, and then put these dark magic pages into a black package. Then, the skeleton waited patiently until dark, then wrapped in a black robe, carried the package and walked out. Snape took a deep breath. The mastermind behind the scenes is going to show up. The skeleton walked some distance and walked into a dark alley, where a thin middle-aged man wearing a black robe also appeared here. The moment the middle-aged man took the package from the skeleton, Snape could no longer hold back and immediately activated the porte-clés. A dizzy feeling came over him, and with the help of the porte-clés location, Snape instantly crossed a large distance and arrived in the alley. "Accept your weapons." Snape, who had already taken the anti-vertigo potion, launched an attack the moment he landed, hitting the middle-aged man with a disarming spell. Then Snape froze. This middle-aged man is not a wizard, but a muggle? The skeletons in the alley made a clicking sound, and then scattered into a pile of bones in an instant. "Damn it, I've been fooled," Snape thought in his heart, already realizing that he had been deliberately lured away. Snape looked gloomy. Legilimency. The middle-aged man's memory flashed before Snape's eyes. Sure enough, this guy was a beggar. It was a foreigner who gave him a sum of money and asked him to come here to pick up something at this time. Apart from these, the middle-aged man knew nothing. He didn't even see the person's appearance clearly. Snape quickly rushed towards the old house. As expected, the place was empty, and the alchemy book disappeared without a trace. There was only a line of words written in paint on the wall: "Mr. Snape, our first transaction failed. You are really wary. But it doesn't matter. The news about the true existence of the Resurrection Stone is regarded as a free gift from me. I have dealt with all the traces here, and I will trouble you to deal with the rest. Please also collect more black magic books for me. I look forward to the next transaction, X." Snape returned to number 19 Spider End Lane with a gloomy expression. "Don't let me catch you." And on the edge of this town, in a basement, Mark was writing furiously, recording information one after another on the paper. Marin sat aside. "Why did you let the skeleton get into the coffin again? Why don't you just let it bring the book back, so that you don't have to copy it by hand now?" While connecting with the skeleton's vision, Mark copied the formula from the alchemy book onto the paper, and said to Marin, "No. If that book has been tampered with, then we will be exposed. Now it is the safest way to completely isolate this book from us and transfer the knowledge in the book through the shared vision between me and the skeleton. I am now a fugitive from the magical world, so be careful when sailing." Marin grabbed a piece of paper and shrugged. "Okay. So how are we going to do these alchemy skills?" I seem to be able to understand only a small part of the simple ones, but I can't understand a lot of them. Mark's face was expressionless. Look for it slowly where you can understand it. As long as there are one or two that can be used, we will make a lot of money. This book is thicker than sea language, from getting started to burial. I don't believe that among tens of thousands of recipes, we can't find one that we can use. Marin asked again, how are we going to sell it if we get it? There are so many wizards in the magic world, so there won't be any who think of this way to make a fortune, right? Is there any law in the magic world that prohibits this? If we sell on a large scale, will people come to our door? If they find you, then we will be finished. Mark curled his lips. First of all, my age is too conspicuous, so I won't come forward. All transactions are completed by you. I hide in the dark and become the mysterious Mr. Secondly, we don't sell goods in the traditional sense at all. Don't think of us as a supermarket that sets up stalls and sells retail goods. Marin was stunned. Then what are we selling? Mark chuckled. We sell technology, high-end technology. For example, the formula records a kind of dragon blood steel smelted with dragon's blood. According to the formula, it can ignore the burning of flames and will not melt even in the fierce fire. Zoe, do you know what is the most common damage to aircraft engine materials? Marin was confused. What is it? Mark snapped his fingers. Creep. At high temperatures, even without external stress, metal materials will creep and then deform. One of the properties required of aircraft engine materials is better creep resistance. If we sell this dragon's blood steel to the military to build aircraft engines, or provide samples for them to study, is this a way to make money? How do wizards know that the military's aircraft engines are doped with dragon's blood steel? Just kidding, wizards in the magical world don't even know what a car is. They can't even see where this thing is, so why should they suspect that someone violated the confidentiality law? And now many research institutes have some strange results. I know that Japanese professors got inspiration from studying the great blue morpho butterfly. They are studying optical stealth materials and have even achieved some results. They made a piece of cloth that was somewhat similar to the invisibility cloak. Could it be that the wizard was also suspected of having obtained the invisibility cloak formula and was investigated? Their results were published in the journal Nature. Even students in the field of materials and those who are not studying bionic materials don't know what the blue morpho butterfly is or what this Japanese research institute does. The wizarding world knows nothing about this and doesn't even know it exists, so how could they start an investigation? Mark said calmly, perhaps in the conventional field, the magic world's confidentiality regulations can effectively isolate magic from muggles. But in this kind of field where the magic world knows nothing about it, the so-called confidentiality regulations are completely in name only. If they don't know the research projects of major research institutes around the world and can't discover those secret magical technological creations, then it's also impossible for them to find out what technology we sold to these research institutes. The most profitable ways are written in the law. And laws require knowledge to make. When the people who make the law know nothing about a certain area, the law has no binding power in this area. What we want to exploit is the blind spot of knowledge in the magical world and the loopholes in the statute of secrecy. Chapter 20. Soon after receiving the alchemy formula from Snape, Mark and Marin returned to the town with 3 suitcases filled with the formula. They began the process of rummaging through mountains of books and seas of ink to find available information. The process of reading obscure and difficult to pronounce recipes is extremely difficult, because a large part of the recipes are handed down from ancient times. Many ancient English words had to be looked up in special dictionaries to understand the meaning, especially those proper nouns of alchemy, which almost drove the two of them crazy. They had to spend a lot of effort and buy a book introducing medieval alchemy to find the corresponding meaning. And knowing what the formula says is not enough, they also have to unify the ingredients recorded in the formula with the current description. Some materials had a name in ancient times, but their original names are no longer used today. There are also materials that are only called so in the magic world. Marin and Mark had to consult a large amount of information to determine what this raw material was based on the records of the material characteristics. Compiling this information is a long process, but fortunately, Marin's family still has a lot of savings. Even if the machinery factory no longer produces, there will still be no problem in ensuring the lives of the two of them. While sorting out the formula, the two of them did not give up on the growth of their strength. After Marin obtained the Rogue Mercenary template, her shooting talent has been greatly improved, and she has become more comfortable using firearms. Every day she spends 2 to 3 hours on shooting training, trying out various types of firearms. In the beginning, her progress was rapid. After combining the ability of internal vision, Marin has been able to fire every bullet accurately, and every bullet can accurately hit the desired shooting position. But when she wanted to go one step further and master the flame arrow and ice arrow capabilities of Rogue Archer, she seemed to have encountered a bottleneck, and she made no progress for a long time. Mark told her that these two abilities require long-term development, and they need to personally feel the power of the elements to master them. Once she masters these two abilities, Marin's strength will undergo earth-shaking changes, and she will also have powerful lethality against those supernatural beings. Marin knew this and had no other choice. She had no choice but to calm down and, according to the records of the necromancy school, take time to meditate in front of fire or ice every day, feel their characteristics, and feel the power of the elements bit by bit. Mark has not been idle during this period. He opened the knowledge inheritance that the necromancy school had opened to him. The vast knowledge in it was like a small library. He was sorting out the formulas while reading the knowledge in his mind. The knowledge of the necromancy school is all-encompassing. A large part of it can be divided into biology, which includes the accumulated knowledge of the necromancers on the anatomy of the human body and all things in nature. The other part is pharmacy, which is the pharmacological knowledge accumulated by the necromancer during the research process. And among the remaining bits and pieces of knowledge, a large part actually belongs to the category of philosophy. The unity of opposites between life and death is something that every necromancer must think about in the necromancy school. The perception of death is the true core of the necromancer. Different perceptions will eventually lead necromancers to take different paths, and their spells will also show different characteristics. Of course, it's too early for you, you will understand later. During this period of time, Mark has been studying this knowledge, making himself dizzy every day, but his life is extremely fulfilling. His level is still stuck at level 5, with no intention of improving. But Mark's strength has not stagnated, but has been slowly improving. With his understanding of the knowledge of the necromancy school, his control of his own spells has also improved qualitatively. Before, the spells he released were completely templated, rigid. For example, the skeletons he summoned all looked the same, they were all humanoid skeletons holding bone sickles and bone shields. When he went to find Snape before, Mark had already understood part of the knowledge about birds. He can shape the summoned skeleton into the image of an animal, which is how the bone owl Snape saw came to be. Now he has become more skillful in controlling skills. He can now perform some changes that are not reflected in the skill description. Taking the summoning of skeletons as an example, Mark can now summon skeleton archers holding bows and arrows, and he can also create skeleton javelin throwers, which allows him to switch skeleton configurations according to different situations. As for the tooth spell, after Mark obtained the staff, his skill level reached level 2 and he was able to fire 2 bone teeth at the same time. Previously, Mark could only summon 2 bone teeth as long as he used the tooth spell. But now, he can choose to summon only 1 bone tooth, but the power of the bone tooth will be increased. He can also slightly change the shape of the bone teeth to focus on different uses. For example, some shapes are suitable for piercing, some shapes can tear large wounds on the enemy, and some shapes can make the flight trajectory of the bone teeth erratic, difficult to avoid by enemies. Under this series of changes, although Mark's level remained unchanged, his strength was indeed steadily improving. Time passed like this day after day, and both of them were immersed in this kind of life. A month later, Mark and Marin finally roughly screened the formula. They eliminated those formulas whose raw materials were difficult to obtain, and those formulas that required magic spells to produce, and then struggled to find those formulas that were complicated and difficult to pronounce. During this time, their emotions were like a roller coaster. The recipe is like a box of chocolates, you never know what the next one will taste like. Whenever they look at a recipe, they expect to find what they want, but in most cases their mood quickly turns bad because this thing is waste to them. Sometimes they will see some recipes that seem to work, but after they put in the effort to think about it, they will sigh lightly. Either the raw materials are not available, or the properties of the product are simply not suitable for muggles. Use. After going through hundreds of formulas, their moods became calmer when they looked at the formula. Sometimes they even suspect that there may not be any usable formula in this thick stack. But on this day, the goddess of luck quietly favored them. Mark took out one of the few formulas left and read it carefully. He now has an understanding of these proper nouns, and they no longer feel as obscure and difficult as before. Just when he glanced over, Mark's expression suddenly changed. This is... He cheered up and read word by word. After he read the entire recipe carefully, Mark finally realized, oh, this is what I want. He stood up, and Marin was meditating in front of a group of flames not far away, hoping to comprehend the power of the fire element and shoot powerful flame arrows. Mark walked over and patted Marin to wake her up from her meditative state. Found it. Mark said, get ready, we are going to start arranging materials. Marin was stunned for a moment. Found it. Wait, what did you find? What's the recipe for this? Mark carefully locked the formula into a safe and said as he moved, this formula itself is of no use to us. It is a method of making magic props. But it mentions a formula for a coagulant that can reduce defects when metal liquids are cooled. Originally, this kind of magic prop will be very fragile after being made and will break after one use. However, after using this coagulant during the production process, the strength of the magic prop has been greatly improved, and its service life has been greatly increased. If the record here is true, then this is what we are looking for. A highly efficient coagulant that can reduce the cost of metal casting and improve the performance of cast products. Mark turned around and asked Marin again, and do you know what other advantages it has? Marin shook her head blankly, what? Mark snapped his fingers. Low cost and simple to prepare. Simply the perfect industrial coagulant. Chapter 21. Grind bones into powder and charcoal into powder. Mix the two in a ratio of 1:10 and add concentrated sulfuric acid. Then keep it warm for another day at high temperatures. Add it after the heat preservation is completed. Mark told Marin his translated recipe. The recipe is not too long, and the preparation steps are full, which is half a page of A4 paper. Its complexity is roughly equivalent to the content of a college chemistry experiment class. The raw materials are not hard to come by. In addition to the two main ingredients of bone meal and charcoal powder, other required reagents can also be purchased relatively easily. This is the best news for Mark and the others. In less than 2 days, Marin purchased all the required raw materials, and the two of them started configuring it according to the steps on the formula. The recipe for bone powder didn't specify what kind of bone it was, so Mark prepared some of what he could get. Charcoal powder is also easy to get. Just buy a few pieces of charcoal and grind it into powder in a mortar. Goodoo, goodoo. Watching bone meal and charcoal powder being mixed in concentrated sulfuric acid, Mark and Marin put them into the incubator and quietly began to wait. Another day later, when all the steps were completed, Mark saw a grey-black powder in the flask. This kind of powder feels very fluffy, and Mark guessed that it should have a loose and porous structure inside. Thinking about the raw materials needed to prepare this powder, Mark had his own guess about this powder. The main material here is bone meal, and its main component is calcium hydroxyphosphate. But unlike pure calcium hydroxyphosphate, the calcium hydroxyphosphate in humans or bones is accumulated in a special structure. This structure is the result of natural selection. Only by stacking it in this way can the accumulated bones obtain the highest strength with the lowest quality. Creatures with this structure are more likely to survive. In the long process of natural selection, that's all the skeletal structures we can see today. Perhaps the structural basis of this powder is this packing structure found in nature. The charcoal adheres to the structure of the bone meal, completely covering it. Finally, under the action of concentrated sulfuric acid, the impurities in the bones are dissolved, leaving only a special structure composed of calcium and carbon. And under high temperatures and subsequent processing, this structure absorbs the excess carbon powder and begins to grow, forming a special calcium-carbon grid that stacks together to create the powder I see. If this powder can be explained scientifically, maybe it is a bionic material. Mark was just guessing and didn't know the specific formation principle of this powder. It's just a bionic material. It is difficult to reverse the production process of materials. If it is a bionic material, it will be even more difficult. This powder will only be supplied by us alone for a long time, and that's our business opportunity. He looked at Marin. We have to cast a batch of metal ourselves to try it out and see if this powder can really produce the expected effect. It happened that Marin's machinery factory had a stove, so they simply started the experiment today. Steel making and casting are originally very complex processes, and materials science has a large section dedicated to describing the corresponding processes, which involves complex fields such as crystallography, nucleation kinetics, thermodynamic models, etc. However, Mark and the others just wanted to roughly test the performance of this condensing agent, so there was no need to make it so complicated. We buy steel ingots from the same manufacturer, the same batch, and the same model to minimize errors caused by the material itself. Then we melt them into molten steel under the same conditions. 2 control groups were set up, using the 2 most common coagulants. Corresponding to each control group, set up 10 experimental groups and add 10 gradient concentrations of coagulant respectively. Finally, the mechanical properties of the experimental and control group samples were tested to determine whether the powder could work. Mark made a crude plan based on the little experimental knowledge he had left in his mind, and then took Marin to start preparations. There is a batch of steel ingots stored in the machinery factory, which are left over from previous purchases. Since work has not started recently, these steel ingots have always been kept here, just for Mark and the others to do experiments. In order to ensure consistent errors, Mark simply used skeleton warriors to conduct experiments. The benefits of using skeleton warriors are numerous. Their movements are as precise as machinery, and there is absolutely no hand shaking due to emotional or physiological reasons. You must know that the temperature of molten steel is quite high, and the container containing molten steel is very heavy. If the process is completed manually, the final error will be large. Many metal laboratories do not have automated conditions and rely on students to manually pour molten steel into the molds. After pouring the first batch, you're done with the second batch. My hands were sore, and I was sweating from the heat. My movements were slow, and I couldn't carry the container for a long time, and I had to be scolded by my senior brother or boss. You haven't eaten yet? Try harder. Hurry up. If you don't hurry up, this material will be useless. In the end, the performance of the same batch of samples fluctuated greatly, and I was confused after measuring the data. There will be no such problem with skeleton warriors. Their movements are uniform and precise. If Mark can summon hundreds of skeletons in the future, it will be like having a fully automatic production line of his own. And there is another advantage of using skeletons: it saves effort. Moving containers worth tens of kilograms here and there, and sometimes having to dump them slowly, is sometimes as physically demanding as a construction worker. Who would be willing to suffer this if there was another way? Under Mark's instructions, the 3 skeleton warriors performed various operations accurately. They run back and forth in the machinery factory, carrying steel ingots and containers, not afraid of the hot furnace temperature, working diligently in a working environment that can cause heat stroke, and will not accuse Mark of exploitative behavior in their hearts. Simply the perfect workforce. Soon, in less than a day, the skeletons completed the preparation of 22 sets of steel materials. Then came the exploitation of them. Who made them not tired at all, but still so energetic and with their eyes so wide open? Here is a popular science. Testing the mechanical properties of metals is not just about knocking them against each other to see who is stronger. There is a set of standard procedures. Generally, everyone makes sheet specimens and tests the tensile properties first. The so-called sheet specimens have a special set of size standards. They must first cut thin slices of corresponding shapes on the steel plate before they can be tested. This process is very troublesome. Fortunately, Marin's machine shop has wire cutting machines, and no one here is trying to snatch the machines. The skeleton's determination to complete the task is as determined as the students who come to snatch the machines late at night. After 2 full days passed, 22 groups of sheet specimens were cut. Then you have to polish the sample, which is an extremely boring process. The sheet-shaped samples made of steel must first be polished with sandpaper to remove scratches and other defects on the surface left by the cutting process. Otherwise, if there are defects on the surface, when the performance is tested, the defects will break before the performance limit of the material is reached, and the measured error will be shockingly large. Sand with coarse sandpaper first, then fine sandpaper. Be careful, be gentle, and use even pressure. If any finger exerts too much force and grinds a sloping area on the originally flat sample, then congratulations, you won't be able to enter the next sandpaper until it is smoothed. After about 4 rounds of sandpaper have been used and the surface of the sample has no defects and is as smooth as a mirror, you can proceed to the next step. The next step is polishing, using a special polishing paste to further smooth the sample. There are 3 or 4 polishing processes, which last about half an hour. Only when there are no scratches on the surface of the final sample, and your nose hair can really be reflected like a mirror, can it be sent for performance testing. During this period, if your hands shake during a process and scratches are left on the surface of the sample, then rework and grind again. There are 22 groups of samples, and 5 pieces are prepared for testing in each group to avoid errors. After grinding these more than 100 samples, a student would have to vomit 3 liters of blood. After graduation, he would immediately change careers and never work in this field again. Mark once had to grind a sample from 8 in the morning to 10 in the evening. His hands were almost worn out by the sandpaper and he was still not finished. At the end of the grinding, the laboratory teacher came to drive him away, and he burst into tears. Came down. Fortunately, it's the skeletons that are here to polish the samples now, and there aren't that many moths. When more than 100 shiny samples were sealed in sample bags, testing could finally begin. Put the stretched sample on the stretching machine. Today's stretching machines are still manual. After all, even computers are not yet popular. But it doesn't matter, Mark is only familiar with manual ones. The ones he used back then were manual ones, because the department was poor. Quickly measure the size and thickness of the sample, then start the tensile machine to test the tensile data. 10 minutes later, with a loud bang, the sample was pulled off, and the fracture was a 45-degree inclined fracture. Mark nodded, put the recorded data aside, then adjusted the machine and placed the next sample. A week later, Marin hurried into the factory after finishing her meditation. "How's it going? Are the test results out?" Mark looked tired, pinched his eyebrows, his face seemed a little heavy, and he had a notebook in front of him. Marin's heart skipped a beat. "Failed? This powder doesn't have the defect-reducing properties we expected." Only then did Mark slowly grin and spread out the book. A gust of wind blew outside, and the notebook was filled with beautiful stretching curves until it was turned to the last page. "After testing, we can preliminarily confirm that the coagulant has the effect of reducing internal defects during the casting process. The tensile strength of samples prepared using this coagulant is 20% higher than that of samples using general coagulants, and the toughness is 30% higher. In short, we succeeded. Let's go, have a good sleep first, and then go find our buyer." Chapter 22. Early spring of 1982. The chill in the air is already making people uncomfortable, and the economic winter is making British citizens even more miserable. Britain is no longer the empire on which the sun never sets, and economic recession is a foregone conclusion. For Britain's once world-renowned steel industry, local coal resources are becoming increasingly scarce, which has also dealt them a heavy blow, and the entire industry is still shrouded in a cold winter. During this period, British Steel quickly merged with 17 domestic steel plants and developed into a behemoth occupying more than 50% of the domestic steel industry. Other small and medium-sized enterprises in the British steel industry are all trembling in the shadow of British Steel. This behemoth has not stopped its mergers and acquisitions. In its original history, British Steel would eventually acquire 26 large and medium-sized steel plants, accounting for more than 70% of the steel industry as a whole. Its expansion has not yet reached its limit. On this day, Smith, the boss of Larmor Steel Works, once again rejected the olive branch from British Steel. British Steel offered a very attractive price, hoping to take over Larmor Steel Works from Smith, but like many previous negotiations, Smith flatly rejected it. The Larmor Steel Works has been the work of generations of their family, dating back to the First Industrial Revolution, and has been in existence for more than 100 years. In 1945, the continuous casting method developed by Larmor Steel Works gave it the world's most advanced production line and dominated the British steel industry for nearly 2 decades. However, in the past 2 decades, the overall British economy has been in a downturn, and the steel industry has been in decline. The Larmor Steel Works has slowly declined in the hands of Smith. But even so, Larmor Steel Plant is the pride of my family and will never be given away to others. Smith, who was over 50 years old, knocked on his pipe bitterly, turned around and walked into the factory, but had to sigh. People are panicking. Everyone already knows about British Steel. No one knows how long Larmor Steel Plant can survive in front of British Steel. The minds of workers and R&D personnel are somewhat distracted. The entire Larmor Steel Plant lacked the vitality that Smith felt when he was a child. Instead, it looked like an old man in his twilight years, lifeless and just hanging on for his last breath. Smith walked to the marketing department and picked up the latest financial report. His face suddenly darkened. Sales volume dropped again, market share fell off a cliff, and a large amount of share was absorbed by British Steel. He sighed again. If this continues, I really won't be able to hold on anymore. Smith slowly walked to the R&D department at this time. Several R&D personnel were gathered around a table, seemingly discussing something intensely. Is this data real? I'm not sure, but there's nothing wrong with the experimental plan, and the process is very standard. The data on this stretch curve is very complete and does not look like it is forged. Smith was suddenly curious. He came behind the R&D staff and asked, "What technology are you discussing?" The R&D personnel were startled, and the person in charge immediately replied, "Hello, Mr. Smith, someone sent us an experimental report and sample today. What was sent was a sample of a super effective coagulant. We are looking at its test reports and feel that the performance is incredible." Smith's heart skipped a beat and his eyes became serious. New coagulant. How much can it improve the performance of the product? Can it be improved by 5%? He realized that this might be an opportunity given to him by God. If the performance of the product can be improved by another 5%, then perhaps Larmor Steel has not lost yet and can still struggle to survive for a while in front of British Steel. The person in charge gulped and said, "No, Mr. Smith, the overall performance will be improved by 20%. Smith's eyes dimmed at first, and then suddenly brightened. 20%. He seemed a little out of sorts, but the researchers present could understand. The formula for steel requires a lot of time to explore. The ratio of various ingredients must be carefully grouped. Only after thousands of failures can a new steel formula be obtained. Including the subsequent heat treatment process and supporting casting process, it takes more time and money to produce a new steel with excellent performance than imagined. But now there is a super effective coagulant that can actually improve the overall performance by 20% without changing other processes. This is almost an upgrade of 1 or even 2 generations of the product out of thin air. As long as this product appears, Larmor Steel plant can reverse its decline and come back to life." Mr. Smith's eyes were intense. "Where is the coagulant sample? Where is it?" Soon, the researchers brought in a container filled with black, fluffy powder. Smith glanced at it greedily, and then immediately shouted to the researchers, "Then what are you waiting for? Why don't you quickly test the performance of this coagulant? Also, what else was sent along with the lab reports and samples? Who sent it to us? Let me take a look." 2 hours later, Smith was anxiously pacing the workshop, where more than a dozen researchers were simultaneously testing super-effective coagulants. In Smith's hand was a letter that had been sent with the coagulant sample. "Hello Mr. Smith, I accidentally discovered a method of formulating a super-effective coagulant and hope to cooperate with your factory. I believe it can help your factory get out of the current bad situation. If your factory is interested, maybe we can have a meeting next to discuss the details of cooperation." Zovi Zaisic Machinery Factory. The researchers finally got the experimental data at this time, and they all gathered around the experimental notebook to make calculations. Smith's hand holding the letter was shaking a little, as if he was waiting for the judgment of fate. Soon, the researchers got the test results. They exploded immediately and let out screams of ecstasy or fright. The head of the research department almost ran all the way to Smith, shaking Smith's shoulders obliviously. God! God! 30%! Improved by 30%! It's more than what was reported in the experiment report. Oh my God, the product performance has improved by 30%. It can smash the British Steel products. I swear this is the best coagulant I've ever seen, boss, we have to buy it. Smith was shaken open his eyes and almost fainted from the ecstasy. By God, the Larmor Steel plant can be saved. Reply quickly, we must get this coagulant at all costs. A few minutes later, a fax was sent to the salesperson closest to Marin at the Larmor Steel plant. The headquarters then directly allocated funds for the activity and promised a regional manager position so that the salesperson could reply to the letter as quickly as possible. Send it over. That night, Marin received a letter from Larmor Steel Factory. The letter was written by Smith himself, and the words sincerely expressed the Larmor Steel plant's willingness to cooperate and hope to meet and sign a contract as soon as possible. Marin sat at the table, feeling unbelievable. Smith is a billionaire, and his family's assets are probably not as good as a new piece of equipment at Larmor Steel plant, but now Smith actually wrote to him in his own hand asking for cooperation? And on her desk, the replies were not just from the Larmor Steel factory. Several factories on the original world line that would be merged by the British Steel Company all sent letters to Marin hoping for cooperation. Then let's talk about it together. Chapter 23. A few days later, a steady stream of visitors arrived at Larmor Steel plant. The visitors seemed to know each other. It turned out that they were all old acquaintances in the steel industry, and they all owned 1 or even 2 large and medium-sized steel plants. There were a few people here who had troubles with each other over business matters, but now, everyone looked at each other with sympathy, seeing that they were like-minded people. Because their steel mills are now facing pressure from British steel, their market share has decreased sharply, and they urgently need a way to revive them. Did you get that letter too? You were also attracted by that super-effective coagulant, right? If we can obtain super-effective coagulants, then we will have the capital to fight against British steel and bite off another piece of flesh from it. As the host, Smith also gave these old friends warm hospitality. A group of steel industry tycoons gathered in the conference room and puffed away, waiting for the arrival of the sender. On the other side, Marin was also in a rather uneasy mood. Aren't you going to be there? Is it okay for me to talk to them alone? Marin felt a little nervous. After all, before this, she was just an ordinary girl, but now she had to negotiate with some steel tycoons who were at the top of the steel industry. This kind of pressure really made her feel a little uneasy. Mark patted Marin, and he could understand Marin's feelings. It's normal for you to feel nervous. I mean, if you put yourself in the perspective of an ordinary person, if you put yourself in the perspective of a machine factory owner, of course you will feel that these tycoons make you very stressed. You can try to change the angle. Marin was stunned for a moment. Change the angle. Mark smiled. From a transcendent point of view, they are no longer on the same level as you. In terms of lifespan, your current lifespan can reach 150 years. This alone is far beyond these tycoons. In terms of personal force, as long as you don't die, sooner or later you will become a being who can easily control their life and death. You are no longer an ordinary person. Relax, you are an extraordinary being now, there is no need to be so reserved. We have many escape routes, but these steel tycoons will be dead ends without the condensing agent we provide. He blinked at Marin. Do you feel better now? Marin breathed out softly, I hope so. She looked towards the huge Larmor steel plant not far away. Then I'll go. Mark nodded, and a small bone snake came out of Mark's sleeve, got into Marin's collar, and hid behind her neck. Marin's face turned a little red and she glared at Mark fiercely. Mark seemed unaware. If anything happens, I will use the bone snake to contact you. Don't worry. Marin carried her briefcase and walked step by step towards the door of Larmor steel plant. She was also adjusting her breathing at the same time. With every step she took, Marin's eyes became sharper. When she arrived at the gate of Larmor steel factory, Marin exuded a confident and fierce temperament. I am Zovi Zaisik. Mr. Smith and the other gentlemen must be waiting for me, please let me know. The guard at the door was also greeted early and respectfully led Marin into the factory. In the conference room, the steel tycoon was waiting in the smoke, with anxious expressions on his face. At this time, the door of the conference room was knocked hard 3 times, and then Marin walked in from the outside. The eyes of 7 or 8 tycoons were fixed on Marin, bringing a heavy pressure. Zovi now seemed to be at ease, and calmly greeted the steel tycoons present. Hello everyone, I am Zovi Zaisik, the creator of the super-effective coagulant you see. As for the effect of the super-effective coagulant, I think everyone should know it well, otherwise they would not express their intention to cooperate. Then can we have a good talk? The steel tycoons looked at each other. A middle-aged man in a suit asked, Miss Marin, I admire you for being able to create something like a super-effective coagulant. Its effect is indeed good. But I have a question. He spread his hands, looked at the old friends present, and asked Marin, are you going to sell a formula to so many of us? He laughed and looked sharply, selling one thing for almost 10 copies, is this a bit too greedy? Marin also smiled and responded to the middle-aged man, there is an old saying in the East that rare things can be lived in. You all need super-effective coagulant, so of course I want to sell more. Gentlemen, it seems that your situation is not good. The problem is actually very simple. With super-effective coagulant, your factory can survive and even seize a market from British steel. Without super-effective coagulants, within a year, most people's factories would either go bankrupt or be absorbed by British steel. A look of anger appeared on the face of a young man who had just taken over the company from his father. Wonderful goods to live in. There is another old saying in the East, which is to take advantage of the situation. In my opinion, it is more appropriate to describe your behavior. Marin spread her hands, then you can choose not to want my things. Then the industry that has been passed down from generation to generation will be lost in your hands, and the workers will lose their jobs due to factory reorganization. Is this the result you want? The steel tycoons were even more angry, but Marin didn't feel afraid or oppressed at all. If you refuse to cooperate, you will lose your entire industry. And what's the loss if I can't reach cooperation? I can also sell the formula to British Steel, just for a little less. Then in less than half a year, this factory and your other factories will slip away from your hands. Walk. Cooperation will benefit both sides, what do you think? Then Marin waved her hand again. Besides, some of you also misunderstood. I'm not here to sell formulas. I don't want to get rich overnight by selling formulas, and then live a life of debauchery or anything like that. That's really boring. I'm here to talk to you about the supply of super-effective coagulant. The Zasik machinery factory under my name will produce super-effective coagulants in the future. I deeply sympathize with the oppression you face, so I am willing to sell the produced coagulants to your factories at a reasonable price. What do you think about letting me be your supplier? This is the result of discussion between Mark and Marin. Selling the formula in one go only resulted in a sum of money, which only made the two of them multimillionaires. Apart from money, they do not receive any social resources. What Mark and the others want is a basic base, a booming enterprise, and a force that can allow them to be protected in society. A factory that pays huge taxes every year can also stimulate surrounding industries and provide thousands of local jobs. Naturally, the local government and all parties will pay special attention to Marin's factory. In this place, Marin and Mark will naturally not encounter any trouble. With the further expansion of the factory, Marin's influence will gradually radiate to the whole of the UK, becoming one of the most important figures in the UK. Mark hid behind Marin and used Marin's social resources to facilitate his actions. This is the plan of two people, which is much more cost-effective than simply selling the formula at once. The steel tycoons began to discuss heatedly. But they really didn't have many choices, and in the end, they all agreed to Marin's request. However, they also put forward a clause that Marin could not sell super-effective coagulant and its formula to British Steel. This clause was also expected by Mark and Marin, and this was their plan. Arms dealers can only make huge fortunes during wars, and Marin and others can only make the most profits when the steel industry is competing for hegemony. This is the same reason. Marin readily agreed to their restraints. The signing of the contract was completed within the next week, the two parties agreed on the delivery time, and Marin hurried back to the machinery factory. In the machinery factory, several huge reactors have been purchased, and powder worth tens of thousands of dollars is being tumbling and mixed in them. Okay, get ready to make a fortune. Chapter 24. In the machinery factory, the equipment originally used for mechanical processing was moved aside, leaving a large space free. 3 large reactors are placed in the machinery factory, where a large amount of raw materials are reacting, gradually transforming into a super-effective coagulant structure. Congratulations, well done. Mark smiled at Marin. Marin exhaled and nodded, feeling confident. It's much more interesting than I expected. This is really exciting. But soon her face turned bitter, and she frowned as she looked at the 3 large reactors in the machinery factory. Part of the advance payment from Larmor Steel Plant has come over, but these 3 reactors plus the raw materials, it's almost all spent, and payments from other steel mills won't come until they see the first batch of super-effective coagulants. What should we do if we need money during this period? I feel that there are still many places where money needs to be spent. Expanding factories, increasing security measures, automated production equipment, we can't get so much in a short time. Mark didn't seem so worried. He said calmly, the expansion of the machinery factory is necessary. The current floor space only accommodates 3 reactors. The efficiency is really low. We need a larger factory building and more reactors. Otherwise, these 3 reactors will not be able to meet the needs of those steel plants. Security measures are also indispensable. Now those steel mills are probably keeping an eye on our formula. If the factory's security measures are too poor and it can be peeked at casually, there is a risk that the formula will be leaked. It doesn't matter if the formula is leaked, we can find something else. But it would be really bad if we are afraid that our secret will be discovered by others, so we must have a strong security system to ensure that no one except us has permission. Access to the factory. There are also automated equipment, which can not only improve production efficiency, but also reduce the number of employees in the factory, which is also necessary for us. Marin sighed and smiled bitterly. I just saw an unimaginable number on my account. It was all spent in the blink of an eye, and now I need more money. Then where are we going to get the money? Mark shrugged, it's a bank loan. The purpose of a bank's existence, apart from saving money, isn't it the only thing left to make loans? A large amount of money has just been deposited into your account. You are definitely a high-quality customer of the bank. Bring the contract we signed with the steel mill, find a bank to borrow funds, and get these things done. For mortgage, just use a formula. Banks are greedy and are eager to lend us more money. And now the country is spending a lot of money to support the steel industry, hoping that the British steel industry can regain its position in the world. It is much easier to get loans now than at other times. Marin looked a little struggling. To be honest, I really hate loans. When I used credit cards in the past, it felt really bad when the bank issued bills every month. Mark breathed out, that's because you didn't borrow enough. When you borrow £10,000, the bank will guard you like a thief and want to urge you to pay back the money every day. But if you borrow 10 million, the bank will care about you like an uncle. At least when your debt is in a healthy state, they will only support you like a god. There is no businessman in the world who does not owe debts. The bigger the business, the more debts he owes. For many companies that have achieved a leading position in the country, their liabilities are almost as much as the company's total assets. In the end, aren't they still the bank's best customers? So you can borrow money with confidence. Don't be too petty and borrow too little. Too little will not be enough. After listening to Mark's words, Marin was also dizzy, so she took the contract with her, hired an accountant at the accounting office, and went to a nearby bank. That night, the bank's regional director flew over and bumped in the car for another 2 hours before arriving at the Zaisik machinery factory. After some compliments, regional head Jack once again looked at the various authorization documents in Marin's hands, especially the contracts signed with British steel mills, and couldn't help but look ecstatic on his face. A quality customer, this is definitely a quality customer. If this deal is completed, Jack will probably be promoted soon. He enthusiastically introduced various projects of the bank to Marin, and also took out the expensive luxury goods specially brought from the car as gifts to Marin, and invited Marin to become a VIP customer of Jack's bank. When Marin asked how much loan he could borrow, Jack's eyes flashed and he asked tentatively, "If you are willing to use the super effective coagulant formula as collateral, I can report it directly to the headquarters, and the first phase can be I'll lend you £20 million, and it's an interest-free loan. If your factory is in good operating condition, it will be easier to obtain second, third, and even more term loans, and we will open a higher loan limit for you." Marin's expression changed. It seems that this bank is very interested in the formula of super effective coagulant. It's no wonder, after all, this formula has the power to overturn the status quo of the steel industry. Marin's current power is too weak, and more benefits of this formula cannot be discovered, but if it is operated by a bank, they will definitely be able to obtain countless wealth by relying on this formula. Although he knew the purpose of the bank, Mark still said in Marin's ear through the summoned object, "Promise him, the most important thing for us now is cash. Only with cash can we develop. We will not be in a situation where the bank takes away the collateral. Even if it is taken away, we have other formulas to make a comeback." Marin calmed down and stretched out her hand to Jack. Then, happy cooperation. Jack's pupils also showed ecstasy. He was just tentatively hoping to put the formula as collateral, but he didn't expect Marin to agree so readily. Now Jack felt a little regretful. He should have promised a higher limit just now. In this way, Marin might not be able to repay the loan, and finally let the bank take away the formula. However, he quickly came up with the agreement. Marin invited professionals from the law firm and the accounting firm overnight, and the agreement was signed in the early morning. Within a few days after signing the agreement, loans of £2,000 million began to arrive in Marin's bank account one after another. Marin was dizzy and thirsty after seeing a series of zeros. She never dared to imagine that one day he would actually become a multimillionaire. When you have money, you don't panic anymore. Regarding the expansion of factories and production equipment, Marin simply hired a professional team as consultants and started the process at an extremely fast speed. During this period, the 3 reactors of the machinery plant never stopped reacting, and were able to produce nearly tons of super-effective coagulant every day. Although this is just a trivial matter to those steel mills, a series of news from the Zaisik machinery factory also reassured them. The money agreed upon at the beginning was paid one by one, and all the affairs of the machinery factory were carried out in an orderly manner. The first phase of the factory expansion project took less than a month to complete. The machinery factory expanded 10 times on the original basis, and the number of reactors placed inside increased from 3 to 40. Security measures have also been set up, and all entrances and exits are tightly blocked, making this place a fortress. Absolutely no one can pry into the secrets of the factory without the permission of Marin and Mark. An automated assembly line was set up, requiring only a small amount of manpower to complete the work. Mark simply asked the skeleton warriors to serve as the labor force. Anyway, their movements are fast and agile, and they are as precise as machinery. They can work day and night. One skeleton warrior can equal the labor force of 5 ordinary people. When the plant expansion was completed, the production of super-effective coagulants suddenly began to grow exponentially. Steel plants, led by Larmor Steel Plant, immediately seized the opportunity and blew the clarion call to fight back against British Steel. Chapter 25. From April to May 1982, a series of exciting news broke out in the British steel industry. First, the British Steel Alliance, headed by Larmor Steel Works and uniting nearly 10 large and medium-sized steel plants, announced its establishment. There is no doubt that this is going to be a head-on battle with British Steel. The outcome of this commercial war will determine the direction of the entire British steel industry. Their victors would gain significant market share, reverse Britain's steel winter, and perhaps even revive the British steel industry's standing in the world. At first, no one was optimistic about the British Steel Alliance, because the steel mills in the alliance were in extremely poor operating conditions, and British Steel had already occupied most of the market share. However, with the establishment of the British Steel Union, came a series of shocking depth bombs, which stirred up the British steel industry. The British Steel Alliance has launched a series of new steel products from civilian to military uses in one go. These steels generally exceed the performance of current mainstream steels by 20% to 30% in terms of toughness, strength, stiffness, density, formability, and other aspects, catching British Steel by surprise. Although British Steel immediately demonstrated a new generation of steel under development, some of which have properties even better than those of the Steel Alliance, one is that it is not yet mass-produced in the laboratory, and can only be used in a few areas, and the other is variety complete and already available, any fool knows how to choose. After the release of the new steel products, orders flew to the British Steel Alliance like snowflakes, which shocked these steel mills. With the order, there is blood for the steel mill, and it can finally run smoothly again. The British Steel Alliance reversed the decline in one fell swoop, stopped the decline in market share, and began to cut flesh on British steel. The entire British steel industry has entered a situation of polar opposition. Fierce competition is unfolding in the steel industry, which has given the steel industry new vitality. The orders Marin received were also expanded repeatedly. The factory was operating at full capacity, producing coagulant day and night and sending it to the Iron and Steel Alliance, in exchange for a lot of money. On the other side, Mark and Marin were struggling with something. There are more and more orders for coagulants. Should we still purchase raw materials as in the past, or should we build our own raw material factory to supply the factory? Mark frowned. The pollution from the charcoal plant is too great. I'm afraid the government and local residents will be very unhappy and encounter a lot of resistance. Building a charcoal farm is not worth the gain. It reduces a little cost, but it damages our basic image. Marin nodded. What about ranches, slaughterhouses and food processing plants? Do we need to build these 2 factories? If they want to be matched with our factory, the scale of these 2 factories must not be too small. Before Mark could say anything this time, Taegyo, who had been in the Mark of the necromancy school, had already spoken. Taegyo's voice came in Mark's mind. I suggest you build one. It will be good for your path as a necromancer. You have been learning the basic knowledge of the necromancer during this time. I admit that you are an excellent student, but to go further on the path of the necromancer, these basic knowledge alone are not enough. You need a place where there is reincarnation and you can feel the power of life and death. Pasture breeds life, and slaughterhouses create death. Spending more time in these 2 places will be of great benefit to your path as a necromancer. Maybe it won't take long before you can break through the shackles you have now and reach a higher level. Taegyo said so, and Mark also made a decision. Build all these factories. It just so happens that these factories can provide jobs that our machinery factories cannot provide. Food processing factories follow the path of small profits but quick turnover, mainly selling to South America and Southeast Asia. This is also a way to generate income. However, we can't pay for all the land and factory construction costs. We can pay part of it, and then go to the local government to apply for a low-interest loan and some preferential policies. This is also a good thing for officials to increase their political achievements. They can't do nothing. Let's do it. After the matter was finalized, Marin quickly took the team to meet with local government officials. Local officials are worried about the unemployment rate and are eager for companies to invest in building factories. Now that the British economy is in decline and the unemployment rate is rising, most people are living in a hurry and are afraid of layoffs every day. A little aside here. By this time Harry Potter should have been given to the Dursleys for adoption by Dumbledore. But maybe Dumbledore had no worries about food and clothing in the wizarding world, never worried about life, and never raised children, so he may have forgotten one very important thing: the cost of raising children can make people breathless. Come. In this economic downturn, the Dursleys have just had a child, and now they have to raise Harry Potter, and they can't even get a penny in child support. I'm afraid it took them a lot of effort to raise Harry Potter. Just changing diapers, feeding, and making complimentary foods are already a huge hassle. If he gets sick, the money spent will make people look sad. Green. So from a fair point of view, the Dursleys are not very good to Harry, but their efforts are definitely more than many people imagine. Blaming the Dursleys blindly is probably going too far. If you have raised children yourself or have seen others raising children, you probably know how much of a burden a child is. After giving birth to a child, a man has no chance to waste his life. This is no joke. Dumbledore, on the other hand, did things very poorly, and I am afraid he must bear a large part of the responsibility for Harry Potter's childhood experiences. Well, let's get down to business. When Marin arrived and expressed her intention to open 3 such large-scale factories, the local government was overjoyed. The establishment of a factory means that there are a large number of jobs, which means that local people can have a stable job. For them, this is a powerful political achievement. Therefore, Marin's requirements were basically met. The local government sold Marin a piece of land at an extremely low price, enough to build a large ranch. Preferential policies such as tax exemptions have also been passed. Although there was some wrangling over low-interest loans, the government finally took the lead in borrowing a sum of money from banks to support the construction of ranches, slaughterhouses, and food processing plants. Mark waited patiently. He has a special room in the coagulant processing plant, which is extremely safe. Only he and Marin can open the door. Mark usually sits in his room meditating, learning the basic knowledge of the necromancy school, and silently completing the missing parts. There is no need to worry about life, no need to worry about the pursuit of the magic world. Just like a sponge to constantly absorb knowledge, this monotonous life is particularly satisfying for Mark. Although it seems that there is still a long way to reach level 6, since there is no pursuit, there is no need to be so anxious and just rest assured and enrich yourself. Finally, at the end of 1982, the ranch construction was completed. The introduced cattle, sheep, and other animals made the pasture lively, and there were sounds of bleating and mooing all day long. A specially hired management team kept the ranch in order. At the same time, the ranch also provided a large number of temporary jobs to local residents during the construction process, and also helped many people ease their economic conditions. After the construction of the ranch was completed, a group of residents who were serious and responsible during their work received invitations to become regular employees of the ranch and receive training. The salary and benefits are already quite good in the local area. The subsequent construction of slaughterhouses and food processing plants also recruited a large number of unemployed people, allowing them to return to work after being trained. Marin's roots in the local area are already unshakable, as someone from every 2 households may work in the Marin family's factory to support their families. Marin's series of actions also made her appear in the newspapers frequently, becoming a local celebrity and having close ties with the local government and bank executives. By this time, the basic plan envisioned by Mark had been completed. Business matters are already developing steadily and there is no need for me to interfere. By this time, I can devote all my attention to learning magic.